induction means? Yeah, that's as turbo or supercharged. Anytime we're forcing air into the cylinders, it's forced induction, opposed to naturally aspirated, which means it breathes on its own, right? Then we got variable valve timing, and it's very hard to come up with a term here. Variable valve timing is like the general overall term for it, but it has a lot of different names, and different manufacturers call it different things. And it's VVT, it's VVTI, it's VVTIE, it's VVEL, it's Vanos, but generally we're varying the timing, which we never used to be able to do. So that's a little more modern. And then variable displacement. And this one's been kind of a failure, right? So when you've got these engines that are going to do V8 and then drop to 4 and then back to 8 and 4, it sounds cool because you can have the power of a V8, but you can have the fuel efficiency of a 4-cylinder on the highway until it fails, and then you have a broken V8 that costs a lot of money to fix. So part of the reason that we bring this up is the manufacturers don't necessarily want this technology. Can you guys imagine why they're implementing this? There's a trend with me. I'm always trying to tell you why they do it. Emissions, right? They're trying to hit corporate average fuel economy standards, which are imposed by the government, and emission standards, which are imposed by the government. So when people say, oh, the cars are junk now, it's sort of like, well, maybe that's true, but maybe it's not. But what I can say is, if they could just keep making the same thing, they could probably get it pretty close to perfect, but they can't. Why can't they? Because of these emission standards and corporate average fuel economy standards and stuff. So they're constantly coming up with like, how can we hit this new standard? How can we implement a new technology to hit the new standard? Okay, so that's the why. All right, so forced induction. It's going to be used to increase the density of the air charge. You know what that means? Like compressed. To increase the density means to squeeze more molecules into a space. So in other words, that's like boost, right? If you have no boost, that means you're relying on the engine to pull in as much as it can. Technically, we have atmospheric pressure, right? So at sea level, 14.7 pounds of air pushing down from our atmosphere. When you open up the intake valve, that air pressure is pushing in. Makes sense? But we don't really consider that 14.7 psi because it's everywhere. It's like a Star Wars quote. It's all around us and in us and through us or whatever. Like it's the force, this atmospheric pressure. That's what we call gauge zero. So if you were to pull out a pressure gauge right now and have it not plugged into the tire, what would it read in the air? 0. So that's why we call it 0 gauge PSI. But technically, we're under 14 point something, right? Our elevation here, we're not 14.7, we may be 14.5, something like that. Cool? But from now on, we're just going to say 0, right? So if you got a naturally aspirated, we're working off a 0. That means it's kind of struggling to pull that air in, right? So if we were to force it in, we can improve this word right here, volumetric efficiency. So you're like, wait a minute, I thought turbos and superchargers were for power. Well, they are, but actually they can, right here, improve the volumetric efficiency, which means they're going to improve the engine efficiency. So superchargers and turbochargers are not just for too fast, too furious. The manufacturers are using this all the time to actually increase the efficiency of the vehicle. Turbo a little bit more. Superchargers have a parasitic drain. The supercharger takes power to make power, but they make more power than it takes, so it's kind of a win. But a turbo is really efficient because we're already losing those exhaust gases. We're just repurposing them essentially as a wind turbine that doesn't generate electricity, but it actually turns another wheel which pushes more air in. It's really an efficiency thing. However, another way to look at it is, I'll give you a quote. Lexus will never have a 4-cylinder engine. And somebody said that. I can't say who, about 20 years ago. And because a lot of the manufacturers are going to 4 cylinders, better fuel economy, trying to get them, a little cheaper. And this particular Lexus engineer was sort of like, no way, no how. Like Lexus is a flagship. It'll always be a V8. Well, guess what they make right now? A whole bunch of 4-cylinder Lexus models, but a lot of times turbocharged. So correct, but that's the other way you can look at it. If you could take, first off, the V8 kind of became a V6, right? And then from a V6, they kind of went to 4. So if you could take a V6, drop 2 cylinders and make it a 4-cylinder, you're probably going to be a little more efficient, a little better fuel economy, stuff like that. But what if you still want the power of the V6? Turbocharge it. Typically, a 4-cylinder will make a V6 power with turbo reasonably from the factory, not trying to push it at all. Typically, a V6 will make V8 power. Turbocharged V6 is running against V8s. It's just look at it time and time again. You want to look at the GTR, it's run against Mustangs and Camaros. And by the way, the all-wheel drive is going to result in it's probably going to win. But if you got a forced induction 6-cylinder, it's after V8s. If you got a forced induction 4-cylinder, it's typically after V6s. Now, there's times where you could take a forced induction 4-cylinder and have it surpass the V6 and the V8 and be after the Vipers with the V10s. But you're pushing some stuff at that point. The manufacturers don't want big turbo builds with blow-off valves and, crazy tunes and stuff. They want a reasonable car with a cast iron exhaust manifold, not a custom TIG welded titanium header with all this beautiful dime stack TIG welds on it. Like that's race car stuff. That the manufacturer is going to have it be a little more modest, if you will, right? But factory vehicles all day, supercharged, turbocharged, it's very, very normal now. Totally normal, right? And then another thing is actually it helps with high elevation too. So if you're at higher elevation, like airplanes, they started supercharging, turbocharging airplanes first, because when you're at a higher elevation, just like it's harder to breathe, that's why you have to train for Mount Everest. The engine has less atmospheric pressure, so it's harder to get it to pull that much in. And they want it to be a fully packed, dense, cold air charged cylinder. And it's hard to do that at 20,000 feet. So they force it. Make sense? All right, cool. And then if you look at this is really just a chart showing like your air density is going to change with temperature. So we want, when we're in the pursuit of the high volumetric efficiency, you guys should know we want a colder air charge. Everybody knew that? You want a cold air intake, right? You don't want a hot air intake? You could buy the shorty cold air intake that sucks the air from the engine bay and it makes it go boop, boop, but that's a hot air intake. You're literally decreasing the performance from the factory. From the factory, at least they got a boot that goes over to a box. And if you look, your air box a lot of times has a little scoop from the grill or the fender or something. Right from the factory, they're trying to pull cold air, or at least as cool as they could possibly have. Now, if you wanted a legit cold air intake, that cold air intake is probably going to come out and go down through somewhere and go out of sight. And the air filter is going to be like somewhere else. It's not pulling hot under a hood engine bay air. Like a legit one's going to pull it from further away. The factory ones generally too. And this is why. The more dense, the better the air charge, the more dense it's going to be, right? So ideally, if you look, you can get 1.04 at sea level at 55 degrees. But if you warm up to 70, same elevation, you're only at 1.0. If you were to go 50 degrees, but go to Big Bear, 7,000 feet, you're at 0.81. And that's just a calculated number to show you like percentage sort of volumetric efficiency, right? So you can imagine right here, we're changing as we get higher, it's worse. And as we get hotter, it's worse. So ideally you want cold sea level or lower than sea level, ideally, right? And then you can see when, like if we look at a horsepower curve, there's a couple of different things to consider. Horsepower is one thing. Torque is a different thing. We talked a little bit about it. typically in engine class, torque is a twisting force. So how much torque your engine puts out just means how much force it puts on the crankshaft. That's it. Horsepower puts that number in a context with time. So a lot of torque means it can turn a lot, but it doesn't measure how much work it can do at what rate. Make sense? So horsepower is more like a little bit of a complicated formula to be able to determine how much work can that engine do and how fast can it do it. Makes sense? So when you look at these, just understand, you guys have seen dyno graphs before. You know, we're measuring, like in this case, naturally aspirated torque was 200. And then at 4,000 RPM, it peaked at about like 275. Cool. If you were to turbocharge that or supercharge that, you may very well get potentially up to 543 horsepower at 4,000 RPM. Like you could do that. That's probably working it pretty hard. So again, the main purpose is improve efficiency. But in the aftermarket, we love to make it go faster, and they work for that as well. Cool. But technically, if you have the tune right, this may not be any more inefficient. It may potentially actually be more efficient. But if you tune it and you're going for max power, you're probably going to run a little rich, and that's not more efficient. And you're probably going to try to run your cooling system cooler to gain more horsepower because the air density, and that's not more efficient, right? So in the aftermarket, a lot of times we go away from efficiency and we go for power. Now, this sounds kind of ridiculous, but I had my Hummer tuned for efficiency. When I went in, I'm like, I just want an efficiency tune. And like a couple people were like, nah, we don't, we do like horsepower tunes. And I was sort of like, yeah, I want efficiency, right? And so went back and forth and did a remote tuning session with the guy. And the way we went about it was a little different. We weren't trying to run it rich. We weren't trying to add more power. It was more like we're trying to advance the timing to get the burn to be thorough. We're trying to keep our temperatures fairly warm, because when it's cold, fuel droplets will condensate on the engine parts and not be burned, right? So this is probably not going to be more efficient in full transparency, though the turbocharger and the supercharger can be more efficient if they're tuned and designed the right way. All right, cool. So that's kind of what this is saying. Another term for you, 75 to 85% of a normally aspirated engine would be its volumetric efficiency. So your naturally aspirated engine, when it opens up the intake valve, it doesn't have enough time to thoroughly fill that cylinder all the way to atmospheric pressure, right? It opens the intake valve and then it has to close it. Do you think it gets more efficient as you get closer to red line or less? Less is true, because you only got a millisecond to open that intake valve and close it. So it's pulled in some air, but it's like, if you could have only left the valve open a little longer, I could have got a little bit more air in there. But how can you? I mean, the engine's turning so fast. Okay, now I've just set the stage for what variable valve timing does, but let's not go there quite yet. But just understand, when we're in the pursuit of trying to get that engine fully, that cylinder fully charged with atmospheric pressure, it takes time. And at higher RPMs, that's time we don't really have. And, you know, we're chasing it. So instead, a lot of times what we'll do, we'll just boost it. We'll just supercharge, turbocharge it. And then it's like, oh, we're shooting for like a 75 to 85%. Yeah, we're over 100 right now. Technically, if you make any boost, right? Boost is PSI. When your engine's running, you're making inches of mercury vacuum. When you supercharge or turbocharge it, as long as that supercharger, turbocharger is spinning up, you can, the second you get 0.1 PSI of boost, you're over 100%. Make sense? Because remember, atmospheric pressure on the gauge is 0. So if you have 1 PSI, is that more than 0? Which means it's more pressurized than your atmospheric pressure. So therefore, it's above 100%. Now I'm just going to give you just a little, I'm going to mislead you, and then I'm going to correct you, and then I'm going to tell you why my mind is blown and I'm still not totally, my head is not wrapped around this. When I went through school, they told me a naturally aspirated engine will never reach 100% volumetric efficiency. And they said it just like that. And I was like, okay, it makes sense. Cause like, how could it? You don't have enough time. There's going to be a little resistance in the air coming through the intake. And then the exhale is important too. When we go to breathe it out, what if the exhaust valve's not open long enough and we didn't get all the exhaust gases out? Like, how are you going to make it 100%? You're going to make it perfect? How? No way. It can't be done. It can never achieve 100%. And so I was like, yeah, that sounds legit. Right. Then, of course, with supercharger, turbochargers, boom, that's out the window. But then this car came out, the Corvette Z06, the new one, the C8. They have over 100% volumetric efficiency. And I was like, but they told me it can't be done. And then they did it. And I don't totally understand all the details, but I know they're doing a lot of stuff with fine tuning the variable valve timing and also the header runner length and the intake runner length. And they've actually got it where they're scavenging so well that the outgoing exhaust is actually doing a suction on the incoming intake air. And they're actually packing that cylinder with quite literally over 100% efficiency. And I'm just like this, like how it's pretty nuts, huh? And the other thing is, like back in the day, they had the WS6 Trans Am. Someday I'm gonna get one. They're not even that much money, but the WS6 Trans Am 2002 black ram air hood is iconic back in the day. Oh, two, you just Google that. All right, that thing had ram air. That thing had ram air. So when you actually go fast, it would literally ram the air in the intake. Now I could see you getting to like 100% volumetric efficiency, but that's not how they're doing it in the Corvette. Now they do have those big scoop intakes, so it probably does help. But from what I understood, they're measuring that engine on the dyno with no ram air, no nothing, and they're hitting 100% volumetric efficiency. And I just can't. I don't get it. The Z06, which is the flat plane V8, that sounds like a Ferrari. That's the one. That's the one right there. Yeah, but that's a naturally aspirated one. Now, when you want to talk about the old Z06, they just supercharged that sucker, same as my Camaro. I could have got the Z06 too, except the Z06, you need to carry on golf clubs and you got to wear New Balance. The Camaro's working man's car. So that's what same engine though, LT4, same thing. But that's supercharged over 100% volumetric efficiency. Then they came out with the new Z06 that's naturally aspirated, and it's like, you're making what now? How? And the sound on those is gnarly, amazing. So take it loosely. This range right here just got blown up, right? But textbook hasn't updated yet. So those engineers doing all sorts of magic and stuff over there. I don't know what they're doing. Cool, pretty neat. But again, now you understand the purpose of the supercharger, turbocharger. Increase to beyond 100% volumetric efficiency. Ram that air in there. Pretty awesome, right? And that's kind of what this was saying. And it goes into the compression ratio and et cetera. But there's another concern. When you have a high compression ratio, that can be more efficient, but it's harder on the fuel, right? We talked a lot about fuel. When you go to compact the fuel and you compress the fuel, it heats it up. You need to make sure that fuel doesn't start to like pre-ignite. Remember that pre-ignition? That's worsened severely when you boost it, when you have it forced induction. So now you have high compression trying to break the fuel apart, and you send PSI into there, and that fuel's like, oh my gosh, I need help. And that's why if you buy a factory supercharged car, turbocharged car, 91 or whatever the highest octane you can get. Make sense? So if mom buys a brand new Hyundai Sonata, and you're like, Hyundai Sonata, that's got to take 87. Maybe not. If it's a factory turbocharged car, it may very well call for 91. One of the reasons, my wife's she's pretty classy. The car that she wanted was a Cadillac CT4V Blackwing, which was a little pricey, but she liked it because it was a manual, had nice, high-end suspension, very rigid. Like that car's a beast. That's what she was all about. And honestly, truthfully, one of the deciding factors was like, If you're gonna drive that car every day, we're back to pumping 91. Like she drove the ZL1 for like 3 years, 4 years to the elementary school. There's a cost, I'm gonna tell you. There's a cost, for real cost. And so like when we looked at the Blackwing, that car's awesome, but it's 91 octane. It's getting like 16 miles per gallon. And it's like, oh yeah, that's going to be $100 a week in gas for the amount that she drives. Was like, that's $400 a month plus. So it was sort of like, hey, let's look at the Tesla. And the Tesla's like, I'm gonna charge that sucker off the solar system. I've paid for, there's only 2 times in the past 4 years that I didn't plan it right and I had to actually stop at a supercharger. I think my only supercharging cost since owning the car totaled was like $6, and that's just because we need a little bit to make it home. So I'm running that thing off of solar. Now, of course, yeah, the solar costs money, but I would rather put the money on solar that I own than pump it in gas slowly but surely and death by 1,000 cuts every week, $100. You know what I'm saying? So big solar electric car. So that's why we ended up going with the Tesla. But the Blackwing is what she really wanted. She still does. I still see her looking. If there's a Blackwing, I'll look over and she'll be like this, like you can't have. It's just, that's the problem. You want these really cool supercharged, boosted, super duper cars. You're running 91 octane. A lot of times mandatory. And if you don't, all of a sudden it'll start pre-ignition detonation. I'll have to retard the timing. You lost power. You can actually mess those up, sadly. Cool. And then again, when we look at the cylinder pressure, because that's what we're talking about, if you look at your cylinder pressure in bar, which is barometric pressure, naturally aspirated, you can see we peaked at like a little over 100, maybe 105. If you supercharge it, look, boost it, you're like up over 150. So more cylinder pressure, right? That's more force on all the parts of the engine. Cool. So what do? You take a regular naturally aspirated car and you just slam a turbocharger on there. eBay turbo kit, send it. Full boom. You're gonna be surprised when something breaks. It wasn't made for this. It was made for 100 psi, 100 bar cylinder pressure, and instead you're giving it 150. And that's when talking about during the combustion. This isn't psi compression. I misspoke. That's talking about barometric pressure when it's in combustion, pushing the piston down. It's a lot of pressure. So if you want a supercharger turbocharge, what do you think? The manufacturers do stuff legit, right? Back in the day, maybe not so much, but now they design the engine from day one for that supercharger turbocharger. Make sense? So what do you think they're going to do when they design these engines? True, they're going to do a tune, but when they're designing the actual engine in AutoCAD or SolidWorks or whatever they're using, they know that it's no longer going to be 100 bar, it's going to be 150 bar. What do you think they're going to do? Design it stronger, right? So right from the factory, those cars are made to be turbocharged. They got stronger connecting rods, a stronger crankshaft. They got a stronger block. They got block stiffeners in support of this. And they got a MLS very strong head gasket, and they got cylinder heads. And by the way, they put a bigger cooling system and they put a bigger fuel system. And so these cars from the factory are designed from day one for that turbocharger, for example, right? So, and that's what I mean, that it's bone stock. You keep it all OEM, and it's probably going to be pretty good. You try to supercharge, turbocharge something that wasn't made for it, it's cool. Tuning's great. You get to build your own custom stuff and then go race it on the street before you get arrested and maybe hopefully win potentially. And it's a guessing game. Like, you don't know what do they have under the hood? What do they have under the hood? I get the excitement. I do. You should probably do it at the track, but I get all that. But like, the manufacturer is not interested in a car that breaks down every 2 weeks and they have to keep redesigning and rebuilding it. It's all designed from day one to work with this stuff. Just make sure you understand. All right, so let's say we got a root supercharger, centrifugal supercharger, a twin screw supercharger. There's lots of types. It's going to be, these are, by the way, this is on the ASE, but not necessarily the aftermarket version. But there are turbocharger, supercharger, variable valve timing, and variable displacement questions all over the ASE. That's how they've modernized it. So you get to learn a little bit about the different types right now. They are different styles. But ultimately, they're all crankshaft driven turbine pumps. They all compress air and increase air pressure and density. So what we mean by that is, what drives them? The answer was there. What drives them? The crankshaft drives them. So in other words, your crankshaft is what delivers your power to your transmission, right? It also delivers power, by the way, to your alternator, to your probably your water pump on most vehicles, to your power steering pump if it's not an EPS, to your AC compressor when it's hot outside or just all the time because you love it. You got health issues. All right, all these reasons, those are all robbing power from the crankshaft. And you know what you just did? You added another thief to your crankshaft. These all pull power from the crankshaft. That's what I meant by it's like a parasitic. It's a parasite. It's taking nutrients. The superchargers rob your engine of that horsepower. They redirect it rather than making your wheels go roundy round. They cut some of the roundy round power and put it into the supercharger power. Okay, make sense? But it's kind of like life. You guys know, here's a term you've probably heard. Takes money to make money. You heard that one? Takes money to make money. If you're afraid to put any money in, to put any investment in, you're just not going to make anything back, right? So if you want to fix cars, well, it takes money to make money. So you're probably going to have to take classes. Good job. Probably going to have to buy tools. Good job, or get started. You're probably going to have to learn on the job and take a job you don't really want, right? You're investing. Why do you do it though? Because your mom said get out of the house, either go to school or get a job, huh? No. It's because you're hoping to pay a small amount of money to, in the long run, get a big ROI, a big return on investment, right? Superchargers, a simple return on investment. If this one robs 10 horsepower and gives us back 50, that's a good deal. If I pay 10 and I get 50 back, I made a profit of 40. I'm happy to pay the 10 to get the 50 total. Make sense? Maybe this one might take only 8 to give me 50. So this would be a more efficient centrifugal style, right? There's different types, different reasons why we use the different types, but they all do the same job. They take power and they make more power. They take horsepower to turn to give us more air under higher pressure to give us a lot more power in return. Make sense? Simple. Cool. Now we got a few different types that we'll cover and everything. But for example, when we talk about the rotational speed, maybe peak speed could be 15,000 RPMs. Like what controls that speed? You guys ever thought about it? Close, but not exactly. What is making the supercharger turn? The belt. What's making the belt turn? The crank. The pulley size difference between the crankshaft and the supercharger control its speed. So if you got, I don't know, let's say I recognize this one. This is a 3.8 liter supercharged. Worked on a ton of those. If you wanted this to spin faster, you'd put a smaller pulley on, right? If you put a bigger pulley on, your belt's going to turn that pulley the same. It's going to be like kind of like seeming like the belt's going the same speed, but it's got to go around a larger pulley, so it's not going to turn as fast. If you made a smaller pulley, that belt's going to super turn that pulley, right? So it could be like overdriven. It makes sense. If you wanted to make more boost, you could actually put a smaller pulley on these. Smaller pulley right there. That'll increase the speed. Now, if it increases the speed, it's going to be probably harder to turn. It's going to take more power to turn it, but it's going to give us a lot more air. You know what that's going to increase though? That won't mess up the timing. However, because we just increased boost, if you increase the boost, that's going to increase your cylinder pressure. If your knock sensor senses pre-ignition, that's going to back off the ignition timing, right? So you can't just simply be like, oh, I'll put a tiny little pulley on there. I'll overdrive the supercharger and I'll turn it super fast. Like there's a little more research that needs to go into that. You got to be ready for that. Or you could put a bigger crankshaft pulley, right? If you put a bigger crankshaft pulley and your crankshaft's turning the same RPM, it's going to move the belt further which is going to turn that supercharger pulley more, right? Bigger crankshaft pulley, smaller supercharger pulley will speed that up, or the other way around is true too. Cool. The other major positive, because it's driven by a belt, gear, or chain, does not suffer from, what's that word? Lag. So what's lag usually associated with? True, if you're thinking like a buffering of a YouTube video or whatever, that's true. But what about with boosted applications? Turbo lag. You've heard the term turbo lag. If you got a turbo and you're like, let me make this appropriate. You're driving your Honda Civic. That's turbocharged. You see it. You look in your little mirror right here. You see a Mustang coming up. The Mustang's, he's coming for you. So what are you going to do? Probably drop a gear and disappear, right? You're going to downshift. If you got a turbo and it's kind of laggy, you'll be like, burn. The turbo will be like, whoa, all right, let me get up to speed a little bit. By then the Mustang's already walking you and you're like, no, Monica, right? Oh, wait, that was an Integra, actually. You know that one. You know that one, right? So there is a lag associated with these superchargers, with a turbocharger. With a supercharger, no lag. You know why? We don't have to wait for it to get up to speed. The belt makes it get up to speed. The belt's driving it. There's no delay. When we get into turbos, you'll understand when we start talking about the exhaust flow, right? So if it's a supercharger, boom, the belt lags it. Pow. Instant power at low RPM, especially roots and screw types. We'll come back to that centrifugal. So, for example, I don't really discriminate. Honestly, if something's pretty fast, I'm probably going to like it. I might not be seen driving it, but I'm probably going to like it. The way I would describe a supercharger on a V8 is it's just grunty gobs of mega torque at low RPM. That's how I feel in that Camaro. Like there'll be that car, to save fuel economy, you go to 1-2, if you're not really on the gas, a thing comes over and bumps you into fourth. If I shift into fourth at 20 miles an hour, you think it's going to be a slug, right? With that supercharger and that V8 and the 6.2 liters, it'll just be like, it'll still pull. And you're like, I'm in fourth at 20. There's no reason this should happen. But superchargers are low end, grunty torque power. I like that. I do, especially like with a truck. Think of what you want with a truck. I would say you really want a low supercharger torque, like a low end. Not low torque numbers, but you want a lot of your power down here at 2,000 RPMs, 1,500, 2,500. Make sense? Superchargers are great for that. Now, when we get into, like applications, you got to weigh out. If it's going to be an economy car, you may not necessarily need a whole lot of low end torque. You're not ripping out stumps with your Hyundai, I don't think. And if you are, video that. I'd like to see it. So you'll see turbochargers have a little bit of a different advantage. Cool. Now, when we start talking about turbochargers, again, they're going to be just a little bit different, a little bit more efficiency related. And of course, when we deal with this type of stuff, we want to factor camshaft design, exhaust design. It all works together. So here's your roots. You got two lobes. Air is going to come in. These are spinning. They're going to kind of scoop the air, carry it around, and squeeze it and compress it. They'll call it like a trapped pocket. Sometimes they'll do a 2 lobe, sometimes they'll do a 3 lobe, right? But when these are turning, they're scooping the air, forcing it around, and then exiting it, right? So it pulls air in and it shoves it out, compressed. That's its job, right? When air tries to come back through, because if you have 10 PSI over here and you have intake air over here, which is going to be 0 gauge, this air logically is going to want to leak through here and go out, right? That's why these have to be very tight fitting, very precise. They need maintenance. You actually need to take care of these. If they start to wear, they won't make as much pressure on the engine side, and that pressure will actually tend to like kind of leak through the supercharger lobes in a way. So have to be a very, very tight clearance right there. Then you got centrifugal, which is just a bit different. I like centrifugal. Anybody know like a brand name that uses this? Bingo, ProCharger. ProCharger. Yeah, ProCharger. If you hear a term like, oh, it's ProCharged, you're like, ProCharged? What the heck is that? That's just a brand of a centrifugal supercharger. Very common. So if you look at it, you're like, oh, okay. Wait a minute, is that a turbo? No, see, it's like a turbo, but it's a supercharger because it's still belt driven. So we're actually just going to run a belt to this front pulley, and we're going to turn it, and everything about the centrifugal supercharger, you'll see in a moment, is going to be the same technology of a turbocharger. These tend to be better, higher RPM. I mean, this is probably not what you'd put on a little mud truck. You know, this would be something you put on a street car that's going to be doing highway blasts, and you know, this is a good technology right here. But it tends to be better for higher RPM because this can spin up a little bit faster, and you can mount it remotely. There's a lot of little things that you could do. Cool. It's also going to be not real common on a manufacturer, an OEM vehicle. This is mostly aftermarket, but some of them have done this for OEM too. There are some. Cool. We'll come back to a little bit of those text, a little bit of those details when we get into turbos. All right, and there's a twin screw. You can see the twin screw. This is something that's probably going to fit right up on top of the engine. A lot of times the inlet is going to be here near the top and the outlet may be somewhere near the bottom, or this might be flipped over, but this is probably going to bolt right on the intake, right? The centrifugal, that's got to be like a lot of times down in a corner, you know, somewhere on a custom build. This is going to be pop right up on the top. So if this sits on the top, you know, that's why you may see a hood scoop or something like that. But, you know, if you see those big Vin Diesel Challenger style big supercharger sticking out, that'd be a twin screw, but it might have a big air intake on the inlet. You know, that's when you see those throttle valves, boop, 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 right? Different technology, but not a bad one. You see where the belt still drives it. Cool. Notice that there's some bearings back here. Be aware that these operate in very tight tolerances. So we can't be having dirt, debris, grit, and stuff like that in there. It all needs to be filtered out really well. Cool. All right, then if we look at a few more, this is aftermarket, a few more details of superchargers. We're going to call this a bypass valve because that's what it is from the manufacturer. But sometimes to help you understand it, I'll call it a blow-off valve. You guys heard blow-off valves before? So here's where it would come in. You're running, let's say you're wide open throttle, second gear. Then you're going to go to shift. You're going to let off the throttle, right? That closes the throttle plate. You're going to shift into third. For that moment, when you let off the throttle plate, you had all this air pressure going in. Then when you slam the throttle closed, that supercharger has already built up a lot of inertia and momentum. There's a bunch of air pressure in there. You close the throttle plate, that air pressure is like, you know, you gotta vent it. And that's really what a blow-off valve does. The blow-off valve, when the pressure exceeds whatever the spring is in the blow-off valve, it's just gonna, you know, see, you've heard it. They make funny sounds. There's even people who, you know, they make turbo sounds and that's their whole job. That's what they do for social media. They just be like, sing, ping, 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 sing, ping, 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 ping. There is, I know. All right, that's essentially what a blow-off valve does. Now, when it's a bypass valve, that's with a supercharger. It's kind of the same, but from the manufacturer, think about this. Could we just simply vent this air out to atmosphere and be in compliance with the emissions, do you think? I don't think so. Like a blow-off valve, except we bypass it back into the system, not out to too fast, too furious RB20 style. Psh, external. Cool. And then there's another thing that they'll do. They'll a lot of times put a bypass valve up on the supercharger, and that'll bypass it internally on some of those root style. So like if you looked at this one, this is a centrifugal. This is remotely mounted. You can't bypass it into itself. You have to have like a bypass valve in the charge tubing. Charge tubing is just, I guess that's actually something I should have thought about. Let's clarify something. The air intake boot, where your air filter and your air box is, that's intake piping. After the supercharger or turbocharger, we call that charge piping. That's under PSI, that's pressurized. So right here, you notice it's not rubber, that's metal. That's actual charge tubing. That's going to be under boost, right? We can actually put it right there because we need to vent it. But on some of these other styles, like with this one, we could put a bypass valve somewhere in here because we have the air intake, then we have the outlet's going to be, in fact, I'm looking at this one. On this one, we got probably the air intake would be here, and then the outlet would be here, and this one's flipped upside down. It's a little bit hard for me to say on this one. I can't quite tell. This could be the intake, and this could be the out. But either way, because we have the in and the out right here, it's really easy to bypass those without having too much piping or anything. We'll just put it right there. Boom. All right, so this valve, you remember what the blow-off valve does? You get excessive pressure, it's going to vent it. But really what the bypass valve does, you get enough pressure, it vents it, but it doesn't vent it externally. It puts it right back into the air intake, the non-boost side. That's what this valve does. So what if you looked at this valve and you saw that it was stuck to the venting position? What do you think would happen? Vent a lot of your boost, right? Exactly. So do you know what the customer's concern would be? Loss of power. They probably get check engine light for under boost codes, right? So on the ASE, they'll ask some questions about a bypass valve. If the bypass valve was stuck open, that means it's venting boost off to the air intake. You're going to lose power. But what if it was stuck closed where it wasn't venting at all? And it'll set codes for that. Not enough boost, under boost. Too much boost, over boost. This valve can cause both of those. Stuck open, stuck bypassing will under boost. Stuck closed, no bypassing will cause over boost. Cool? All right, pretty good. And of course, this is just showing you some of the different compression ratios based on boost pressure. So if you have a lot more boost pressure, like let's say you had a static compression ratio of 10.5 to 1. That's my favorite number. If you have 10.5 to 1, your compression is 10.5 to 1. If you boost it to 10 PSI, it's equivalent of having 17.6 to 1, right? So when we talk about compression ratios, that's how the engine's built. So what if you wanted to run, let's say you wanted to run super duper race car 30 PSI a boost. That's going to be gnarly, right? If you look at 30 PSI boost, all these numbers are too high. If you build your engine where it can take 20 to 1 compression ratio, how could you possibly run 30 PSI a boost? The engine itself may not be able to handle that. Like, so if you want to run really, really high boost, 30 PSI, how can you actually run 30 PSI a boost and have it be a ratio of under 20 to 1? Look right here. 30 PSI a boost. If you want a 19.8 to 1 compression ratio, you need to run an actual static compression ratio of 6.5 to 1. 6.5 to 1 is like not really even enough to run. So this is like a way extreme example. But what I just taught you a lesson on was if you want to run a lot of PSI and that engine can only handle a certain amount of compression, you can lower your compression ratio. How would you lower your compression ratio? Performance, people. Dished pistons, pistons with less compression ratio, exactly. So If you want to do some really wild boost built engine, they'll be like, oh yeah, it's got dish pistons. And you're like, okay, cool. So you put in pistons that didn't have like a dome on them. They actually have a bowl, a dish. They're dished. That's going to make your compression ratio lower. So you might have had a 10.5 to 1, but if you built the engine in this ridiculous extreme example to 6.5 to 1, it can now handle 30 psi of boost. And you can throw a ton of air in there, which means you can throw a ton of fuel, which means you could make a ton of power. You know, the part that makes this whole, there's a good lesson in. If you're not making boost, 6.5 to 1 is not gonna run. I don't even think that will start, right? So like if you want race car stuff, it's hard to get like daily drivable, low RPM, you know, decent stuff. Makes sense? We're probably gonna do a little more realistic. Let's say you went with something where you did an 8 to 1 compression ratio, and you can handle 20 psi of 20 to 1 compression. You could run 22 pounds of boost. That's did I say 8.5 or 8? Let's say I said 8.5. You could run almost 20 psi. You probably really need to run like 18, 19 psi. Mm-hmm.
So is that why, like, if you're doing stuff like that?
Yeah.
Is that why, like, a car will take longer to start in the morning? Like,
Yeah, potentially. Exactly. The car that I think of all the time is like Supra. It's a good engine, but honestly, well, let's say 2JZ, old school. 2JZ stuff, old school. Yeah, and don't give me no Beamer baloney. But either way, same concepts though. You're her. You're legit.
So my thing was, it's just
That's a pretty good driver though. That's a pretty good driver. The reason I want to say the 2J is the 2J. Do you know that the 2JZ stock turbo was like 320 horsepower or something? Like that's just, I mean, that was great back in the day. That's just way basic. That slows them. You're going to get smoked by a Civic Type R. But so what do? You could take that car, you could throw some more boost at it, cool. But if you really want to make 1,000 horsepower, you're going to lower the compression ratio a lot, dish the pistons, and you're going to throw big turbo, and you're going to throw ridiculous boost at it. However, that comes with a cost. That car is going to run crappy at low RPM. It's not going to be that drivable. One of my former students has one of those cars, and I'm like, yeah, I'd like to drive it. We switched a little bit, and the reason I favor my Camaro is it's totally drivable at 1,000 RPMs. I can let the clutch out and not stall. Honestly, I had a hard time not stalling that car. It was twin disc. It was like if it had no torque, it had no torque on the bottom end, and it was sort of like you had to rev it. And then when you rev it, you're going to let the clutch out. You're working it too hard, and then you pop the clutch and you spin the tires. It's like cool cars. But if you really want to be able to throw boost, you got to lower the compression ratio. And that turbo doesn't make boost at 1,000 RPMs when you're trying to pull out of the school parking lot and you stall it 3 times and your students are laughing at you and you need to go to therapy, these types of things. It's just dumb stuff. He also, though he didn't bleed the brakes, like you could barely stop. I was cheating with the parking brake. It was kind of ridiculous. So maybe I got a really bad taste of what that's like, but I'm just saying, you want to run Mega Boost, you can't with really high compression, and the really high compression runs strong without the boost. So like, you got to kind of pick one. That's how I see it. All right, cool. Now superchargers, generally, this is a general statement, have internal oil that needs to be changed. A lot of people don't know that. So on this type of supercharger, there's a little plug right here, and there's a little drain plug down on the bottom. Periodically, like I remember I've done some of these were like 30,000 mile supercharger oil changes. You'd go in and I've even seen that some that are 7,500. You'll go in and you'll drain the oil out of this and you'll put new oil in. It needs maintenance. It's its own self-contained lubrication system. That oil has a hard job. Remember those bearings and stuff we saw in the picture? If that oil fails and that oil loses its lubrication properties and breaks down due to heat and stuff, that supercharger is going to fail. Make sense? So these need their own oil changes. When you change your engine oil, it doesn't change this oil. It's self-contained. Now, a lot of the newer superchargers, they did away with this because a lot of people weren't doing this maintenance and they were failing. So in a newer supercharger, most of them actually receive their own oil. They'll take a little oil line and they'll pump an oil line up there, and then they'll put a little drain in, and the engine oil gets pumped into the supercharger and then drains back. To me, that's a better design. I like that better. That's what they do with a turbo. Okay. So speaking of turbo, I knew it was about there. Turbochargers are different. So far, what we've talked about, let me just get a show of hands. Superchargers preferred. Turbochargers preferred. That's about even. That was about even. That was good. It's a good mix. All right, turbochargers. I've asked probably no less than 300 people this question already. The main reason people like turbochargers is, yes, exactly. The supercharger whines. Hellcat noises. This, like different sounds. Just different sounds. What you want. Myself personally, I've had both. It can go either way. Depends on the vehicle. If it's something that I want low speed torque, supercharge it. If it's something that I want to blast on the highway, turbo would be fine. And actually, you'll see the modern kind of blend the edges. Now a supercharger can be good for both. Turbocharger can be good for both. I'll show you. All right, so how does it work? Well, your engine breathes, right? And it exhales. There's exhaust gas going out. We agree? That exhaust gas goes out, and we're actually going to force the air into this flange. We're going to make it go around this little loop-de-loop, scroll in the housing, and then come out, right? So normally your exhaust comes off the engine and it goes to the tailpipe. On a turbocharger, it comes off the engine. We direct it right into the turbo. It goes around and out the center. So out the center, this is your actual exhaust outlet now. This a lot of times will bolt up to your exhaust manifold, or an exhaust manifold is the cast iron original part. A lot of times these get changed to headers, which are like a thinner steel tube welded, but they have to have this flange on it. This flange is what's going to hold the turbo, and that's where the exhaust gases are going to go in, and then they exit center. Mm-hmm. The downpipe would be coming right off of here. Most of the time it's because of a cat. It depends on the details, right? So if you look at a catalytic converter, kind of next subject, but the catalytic converter, we want to get hot as fast as possible. So if it's on a newer car, the cat's moved up, moved up, moved up, moved up. Some of the cats, well, pretty much all the cats are built into the exhaust manifold now. You can't really do that on a turbo. So the exhaust manifold shoots it right into the exhaust inlet, which shoots it right out the exhaust outlet. And they put the cat as close to that turbine as possible. It's in the downpipe. Unless it's old school, back in the day, we used to have cats that were back up under the driver's seat. You know, they were way back there. But on new stuff, that's just too far away, takes too long to warm up. They're never going to hit the emission standards unless they move the cat way far forward. That's why. You take that cat downpipe out and you put a non-cat downpipe in, you go into jail. Straight to jail. But that's why. Yeah. All right. Now, so that describes the exhaust aspect. Do you know what's actually happened with these blades right here? I'm sure you know. That's like a wind turbine. So if the exhaust is being forced through here, we're going to make it spin up that turbine. Now, I said turbine. Some people pronounce it turbine. I think those are two different things. But if you want to call it turbine, cool. I just don't know if we're talking about the or the you know. So I specifically pronounce it turbine. When this turbine spins, it's being spun by what? What's making it spin? The exhaust flow. And wait a minute, wasn't that exhaust air already flowing anyway? So you see how it's efficient? It's like the wind. When the wind is blowing out there, put up a wind turbine because the wind's blowing. So let's get it. It's efficiency. The exhaust is flowing. Let's put a little turbine in the exhaust and we'll make it spin. This is the, what? Yeah, they kill some stuff. That's true. Okay, but this exhaust turbine is attached to a shaft which goes through the center section of the turbo, which attaches to the compressor wheel. A lot of times I'll call it the impeller. So the turbine is on the exhaust. The turbine gets the exhaust flow, spins the shaft. The shaft spins the impeller. Some people will say the compressor wheel, that's a little bit more of a European approach. Like if you want to talk about aluminum, get out. It's aluminum. Am I right?
I was about to say,
Aluminium. Like, why are you putting so much effort in there? As you would say, you're doing too much. It's aluminum. Aluminium. Like, just stop it. Okay. Impeller. You know why I like impeller? It's where the air goes in. Impeller is im. It's on the intake. Impeller's on the intake. Make sense? Okay. So if that's true, that impeller is spun up, spooled up, if you will. When air comes in from your air intake, which is just your rubbery, junky duct, it goes into here, and that impeller spins it up, builds it into boost, whips it around, and sends it out. So all this air over here is under PSI, right? That's the charge tubing. That's going to be like hard piping, metal. Sometimes they'll actually do plastic, but it's not going to be like cheap basic rubber with little clamps. It'll blow that stuff right off. Now they may use rubber, but it's going to be like reinforced, and it's going to be a big, strong T-clamp, and it's charge tubing. It's just different. Cool. So anything over here is going to be pressurized. So the air comes in freely under atmospheric pressure. The air leaves under PSI. How many PSI? It depends really on the speed of this, doesn't it? And that's why you got your lag right there. You just figured it out. If you don't have a lot of exhaust flow, it doesn't spin up the turbine that much. The impeller spins the same speed as the turbine. It's connected by a shaft. So if your exhaust is kind of slow, your intake isn't really working that hard yet. Can you see how there'd be lag? Remember that Mustang came up on you and like 1,000 RPMs, and you're like, oh, here they come. You're like, ooh. And it's like your exhaust is like, all right, we're moving, we're gonna get that turbine spun up. And you're like, let's go, he's got me. And then all of a sudden it's, but it takes time. It takes time to get that thing spun up really good. Yeah. Now we've done a lot to improve that, but initially that's the shortcoming. Cool. Then from there, you guys can see a little bit. Here's your exhaust side. Some people will call this the hot side of the turbo. It's the hot side because it's the exhaust side. That's where your turbine's at. This will be the cool side, which you can imagine is because that's where the cold air is. Your cold air intake should feed this side, spin around, spool it up, and spit it out the bottom. That's what it does. A lot of times they'll call this center housing rotating assembly. That's the turbine, compressor wheel, or the impeller. Bearings, shafts, oil, coolant passages. This centerpiece right here, center housing rotating assembly, is something that technicians, we don't really rebuild that. That can be rebuilt if you got bad bearings, or you got leaking seals or something like that, but typically you send it out to a facility and that facility remanufactures that. So if you had a Garrett turbo and that turbo was making low boost, or you jumped in there and you wiggled this impeller shaft and it was loose, and you knew the bearing was bad, or you knew that the seals were bad because, well, it's kind of hard to diagnose the seals actually. You might think that it's oil consumption, but then remember oil consumption, how it's got gray blue smoke. If this has bad seal right here, oil will leave the center section and go into the airstream, and it will burn oil. And you'd be like, oh, you need a rebuild, but it could actually be the turbo. The turbo seals could be bad. But the other thing to consider is if the turbo seal is bad, it'll burn oil. But if the turbo shaft bearing is bad, that impeller and even the turbine as well will go up and down. You can't really seal something that's loose with a seal, right? You'd have to fix the bearing. Make sense? So if there's defects like that, the oil consumption could be actually from the turbo itself. A lot of times we tear these down and we actually can see, does it look like the oil is in the whole intake, or does it look like if the intake is dry, the oil consumption's in the engine. If the intake is wet with oil, at least some of it is due to the turbo. It gets a little complicated when you get blow by. And the other thing is you look at symptoms. So if it's, let's say, engine valve guide seals, that's going to burn the most oil when it's been sitting overnight. If it's turbo stuff, it's going to burn the most oil a lot of times when you're under load, or sometimes when you're on decel. This will become vacuum and it'll actually suck the oil right out of the center section. So it's engine load specific. Make sense? Whereas valve guide seals would be overnight specific. So it can be a little hard to tell where the oil is coming from. Cool. But overall, this should make a lot of sense. These bearings in here are really critical. The cool thing is on these turbos, we send an oil line from your oil filter area up to here, and that gets pressurized oil at all times to lube the bearings. So let's just say you're out there, you do a couple hard pulls, and then you're like, all right, I want to shut the car off and go inside. Those bearings are going to be really hot, right? Because this thing spins extremely fast. What do you think you should do to prolong the life of those bearings rather than just shut the car off? Let it sit. And so in the aftermarket, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll add a thing called a turbo timer. That means you shut the car off, you pull the key out, you hit the lock button, you walk away, and the car's still idling. You're like, what the heck? It's got a turbo timer. How long? They have extensive turbo timers that'll look at how hard your pull was, what your temperatures are, what the temperature is outside. It'll run its own calculation. It may leave the car sitting there running for 20 minutes, right? But it's all to protect those bearings. From the factory, we generally don't do that. A lot of times what they'll say from the factory is if you've been driving it hard, let it idle before you shut it off, but it's not likely that they're going to leave it running from the factory. There's some safety concerns there. Make sense? Mm-hmm. I have never seen one where you shut it off and actually get out. I have seen some where it displays the message saying, leave it at idle for a bit, but not where you can take the key out and walk away. No, not that I've ever seen. But good point. I think overall you probably get the overall operation right. Hot side, cold side. We need to spin that exhaust side up. Disadvantages: low boost at low RPM. Remember kind of what I was saying? If you want something that's low and grunty and torquey, the generic answer is the turbocharger is not going to be great for that. Turbo lag. It also makes increased engine temperatures, which a supercharger does too, but the turbo's worse because we got to pipe the exhaust into it. So rather than get the exhaust the heck out the tailpipe, get it out from under the hood, we're like, hey, come on over here and all your nasty heat with you. And we're going to send you through the turbo. And now the turbo's hot. They sell little turbo blankets and insulators and stuff, but it still adds heat. It just does. And types: single turbochargers. Ooh, sequential, series, or parallel turbocharging. Wait a minute. Say what? If it's a sequential or series, a lot of times what they're getting at, I've even seen it called biturbo, but biturbo could mean a number of different things. If it's sequential, a lot of times what we'll do, we'll have one turbo that's really good for like low RPM, and then we'll have another turbo that's good for high RPM. When you're trying to accelerate out of a hole, the turbo with low RPM is a little smaller. It's got smaller exhaust passages. It doesn't take as much exhaust flow to get it spun up, but it can't make a ton of boost on the high end, but it'll start making boost sooner. We'll put a small turbocharger, then a big turbocharger. The small one will give it that lower RPM torque. But then when you get on the freeway, the bigger turbo's like, all right, now I'm here. I don't really like to, I don't like to get out of bed until 4,000 RPM, but you're at $5,000 and I'm way overpowering the first little turbo, right? So that would be like a series or a sequential turbo. When they talk about parallel, sometimes that can be two. Then we jump down to twin. Twin turbo is when you have two identical turbos. They're twins. You have one on the right bank and one on the left bank, right? So there's all sorts of variations and differences. If it's a true twin turbo, you got one turbo on the right side bank and one on the left side bank. The right side bank's hooked up to the right side manifold. The left side bank hooked up to the left side manifold. On the hot side, the cold side combine. Like you'll see the wild twin turbo builds where they got this big old Y pipe coming in, like at the front bumper, going into a super big pipe going in the intake. They look pretty impressive, I think. Go ahead, Jalen. Gotcha. Yeah. Twin turbos are identical. Whereas, like, if you see sequential in any of the description, there's two, but they're not the same. They're different. Cool. And then if we wanted to do more modern things, we do have what's called a variable vane displacement. Now, the vanes, that has to do with the blades and how it gets the airflow. You can have turbos that are good for the low speed. You can have turbos that have different vane blade angles for the high speed. But historically, you couldn't have both. So it's like you want a torquey turbo, you want a high horsepower turbo. You're like, well, I want both. Cool. Then you can have both, but you got to pipe them in and have a bi-turbo, have a sequential turbo. Or they found this variable turbo. A lot of times they'll call this a VGT, variable geometry turbo. The vanes can move. So it'll be like, oh, you want torque? Move the vanes this way. Bam, mega torque. Oh, you're getting up to 4,000 RPMs? Vary the vanes. And now you got the equivalent of a big turbo and a small turbo in one turbo. But there's got to be an actuator that's going to move the vanes. This is most common on diesels, right? Power Stroke, Duramax, Cummins, Mercedes diesels, a lot of these diesels. I think even the TDI, Volkswagen stuff, a lot of them have variable geometry turbos. It gives them good low end torque, gives them high horsepower. The negative is it's a more expensive turbo. It's got moving parts, and those moving parts tend to get carboned up, sooted up, rusted up. And next thing you know, the variable geometry turbo vanes don't vary. They're stuck. You get a check engine light, you fail smog. What do you need? Probably a new turbo. Expensive. Have a nice day. Had to have it though. Yeah. Had to have it. Right? Then we even have twin scroll, which I show in just a moment. Twin scroll is almost like two passages. One can be for low speed and one for high speed. So it's one turbo that almost functions kind of like two turbos in sequence. Right? So kind of interesting. And then when we talk about the series turbo, that specifically the air goes through one turbo and then to the next turbo. So they'll double turbo it. Yeah, pretty much. Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty interesting. There's your big single. They tend to be laggy. Yeah, there's you could bear the picture is not great, but the turbo's down here. There's the turbo oil cooler line. This is on the exhaust manifold. The intake's down there. Yep. Dual turbo, you can another kind of bad image, but they're right next to each other. They both get oil lines feeding them. So like dual turbo, we discussed. There's your VGT. So there's not really much to see in these pictures, but that's a VGT that sits down in the V of an intake. You got the two cylinder heads like this, and that turbo will sit down in the middle and they'll vary it. They're nice to drive. They're a disaster to work on. If you have a variable geometry turbocharger, that means you need the computer to control it. Make sense? Soon as you get into VGT, you're talking about the computer controls that variable geometry, which probably means they're going to do an electronic wastegate, which is actually one of the things we'll cover in a moment. That's all very computer controlled turbo. Pricey, but there's a lot of benefits too. Right? And then again, when it's the VGT, we're going to open and close those vanes and kind of redirect the exhaust flow. And the biggest thing I'd take away with this is if you had, let's say, an underboost on the VGT, one of the things you really need to do is go in with the scan tool and command it to move one way and command it to move the other way. And then you should actually be able to look at the turbo and see if that actuator is moving. If that actuator is stuck, it may set an actuator code, but sometimes the actuator will be stuck on low boost and you'll just get an underboost code and you'll be checking for leaks and checking for this and checking for that. And then come to find out it's your VGT is the actuator is just stuck. So you can go in the scan tool under like active test or output test or special function or whatever, and you can press to move it. You can hear them too, but you can also see them if you look. Cool, all ECM controlled. Then here's your twin scroll. You can see multiple passages, right? Pretty common on GDI systems. It's going to a lot of times do like 2 cylinders for one port and 2 cylinders for the other port. And again, the whole reason for that is if you can do like 2 cylinders for one and have it be smaller, you can get it spun up a little sooner. So this is to reduce turbo lag, right? In a way, it's 2 turbos in one, 2 cylinders for one scroll and 2 cylinders for the other scroll. Kind of fun. A little pricey too. Now let's talk for a second about the cooling system. Supercharger, turbocharger, more power, more better, right? If you're adding compressed air, there's a couple physics lessons. One, when you compress air, the molecules get more tightly packed. Do you know what that means for temperature? Hotter. Yeah, exactly. So wait a minute, I thought we wanted a cold air intake. Now you're saying supercharging and turbocharging makes hot air. Isn't that counterproductive? It's less than ideal, right? And the other thing is, you know, if it's a turbocharger, we've also got the hot exhaust side right there. We tend to struggle with heat a little bit more on turbochargers, but both of them require cooling system upgrades. So the engine's going to be hotter because of the pressure. The engine bay is going to be hotter, especially in a turbocharger, because the heat is now in the engine bay. So like a lot of times what we'll do, just a bigger cooling system. So we had a guy put a turbo. I still remember this really in detail. I shouldn't remember it that well. It's a long time ago, but had a dude with a C5 Corvette. That was his one vehicle. His other vehicle was a turbo Hayabusa. Right. So when he showed up with the Corvette, he'd be like, "Hey, you know, I had these guys. They did this. They did this. They put a turbocharger on my Corvette. Actually, you know what? I think it was a centrifugal supercharger. It was a Pro Charger. Put this Pro Charger on my Corvette, and now when I drive it, especially under heavy loads or on hot days and stop and go traffic, it overheats." And I remember one of the other techs, not my mentor tech, but another tech, he's pretty smart, kind of a ding dong, but pretty smart. He's like, "Oh yeah, that's because your cooling system's maxed out." And the dude didn't like that answer. He's like, "Nah, I'm gonna take it to the homie who works at Monroe Muffler." He took it to Monroe and he's like, "No, you need a thermostat. We see overheating all the time. If it's overheating, it needs a thermostat." So he comes back, he's like, "Yeah, the homie at Monroe said it's a thermostat." And the dude I worked with is like, "Then why are you here? Have him do the thermostat." He's like, "Well, won't you do it?" He's like, "No, I already told you my diagnosis. When you add a supercharger, turbocharger, whatever, you add a lot of heat. We already knew that, you know, your radiator's kind of maxed out on the Corvette. It doesn't have a big grill, like it's sloped back, and the Corvette's already kind of struggle with running hot. And now you supercharge and turbocharge it, and you're surprised, like you need a bigger radiator, dude." He went and had the homie put the thermostat on. What you think happened? He came on back. "Hey, yeah, it's still overheating." My guy's like, "Yeah, and you still got the original cooling system. It's just maxed out." He ended up having to put a big 4-core fat radiator in there, and he added a cooling fan, and that fixed it. So just to visualize, these systems make more heat. So they have bigger radiators. They have other cooling system improvements. They might have a bigger grill. Like if you looked at the C6 Corvette and the C7 Corvette Stingray and the C7 Corvette Z06, bigger grill, bigger mouth, bigger inlets. Same with the Camaro. Same with the Mustang, right? I'll even mix it up. Ooh, Ford. GT500, big mouth. You notice that? Duh, big supercharger, big grill, big radiator, big, the next thing we're about to talk with, intercooler, right? More heat, we got to cool more heat. So let's talk about one thing. let's say we've got an air-to-air intercooler here. The purpose of the intercooler is not to cool the engine, it's to cool the charge air, right? The boost air. Right, exactly. So let's say we've got, you know what happens in the exhaust side, right? Engine puts out exhaust gases, spins up the turbine, leaves through the exhaust. That's it. The exhaust is done. What we got from the exhaust, thank you very much, is a spun up impeller. The impeller pulls in cool, high flow air through the big duct or through the port or through the whatever, or one of my favorites, just mount the turbo on the hood and cut a hole in the hood and just let it suck straight air unfiltered. You know, like cool race car, not going to have a lot of longevity there. Okay, so we pull it in like this. This air right here is cool. The problem is it then goes through the turbocharger and now it's under boost. It's more compact, it's pressurized, it's hot, but also it was just up in close contact with the hot side. We send it out and that hot air is going to not be ideal for power. So we send it through a heat exchanger, and then the heat exchanger, actually in this one, I'm going to fib. Let's make it air to air. Hot air comes in, cool air comes out. How did this air to air intercooler cool the charge air? You've got air inside of this little heat exchanger that looks like a radiator. You got all these fins. What flows through the fins, through the bumper? Outside air. So the outside airflow air through the bumper cools the fins, which cools the charge air inside. Air to air. It's air cooling air. Make sense? The big ones hanging behind the front bumper, that's air to air intercooler. What you get out is cooled air, and that's good for power. Make sense? Now, when I looked a little closer, this is actually a water to air intercooler. And these are better because you can remove 4 times the heat with water than with air. So if you had a space this big for air to air, you could actually do it this big with a water to air. Like if you look, I do all kinds of crap like that. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. If you had air-cooled motorcycle, air-cooled lawnmower, which is pretty much all of them, air-cooled dirt bike, all those can't really, you could put all the fins you want, but honestly, like air doesn't cool that well. You can do 4 times the amount of cooling in the same space with water, with liquid cooled. Exactly. I bet. I just don't do all that, but it's kind of the same idea. I'd be nervous about having a liquid cooled PC. Yeah. And they have a little water pump.
It's a special like cooler that you can put in it.
Yeah.
Like antifreeze.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it makes sense. This is exactly the same. Same idea. You can remove more heat by volume using water than you can air. All right, so let's change it over to a water. Now, like if you look at a Subaru, you ever notice Subaru's got a little hood scoop and they got a small intercooler right up. You pop the hood and you're like, whoa, what the heck is that little radiator? That's the intercooler. The reason they did that was because they put it right there. They have the little duct. The duct is going to pull a little bit air through, but it's going to be a lot of times a water-cooled intercooler. We're going to put air is going to be inside the intercooler, and then coolant is going to go in other chambers, and you're going to have cool coolant right next to warm air. So therefore, it's going to cool the air because the cool coolant. Now, here's the negative. What if your coolant's up to operating temperature 200 degrees? You're not cooling it quite as well, wouldn't you say? So you know what they'll do? I even went, don't tell anybody this. I was at the BMW M4 training, the original one for the techs. They did, now they're not the first ones, right? But I'm trying to not always use my favorite brands. The BMW added a secondary cooling system. It had its own additional radiator, its own additional little electric water pump, its own additional coolant, and it went just to the air to water intercooler. That intercooler got its own coolant. Separate. It has an intercooler, and then it had a secondary turbocharger radiator. It had an engine radiator with engine coolant, and it had a turbocharger radiator with turbo coolant. And so they kept the charge air nice and cool. And they're not the only ones. Aftermarket companies still did that for the 370Z supercharger kit. My Camaro does it too. I have standalone supercharger coolant with its own little intercooler. Like, this is pretty common now. Back in the day, 10 years ago, that was pretty rare.
So it's just two radiators instead of like one big one.
It's one big one with a smaller one.
Direct.
Yeah. Typically, and it's typically the superchargers in the front, but if you picture, I'll again try to diversify, the GT500 or the ZL1, that thing's got a big, big grill. And if you look, there's coolers here and coolers there and coolers there and the radiator's still front and center, but it's usually got the condenser in front of it. Then you might have a supercharger cooler here. Mine has a differential cooler over here. Mine has a bunch of different, there's coolers all over the place with some of those. With good air. Now, if you really want your mind blown, when we're talking about coolers, my Hummer's always been running too hot. You know why? They took a 5-cylinder, said, this is junk. I agree. And they're like, let's put an LS V8 in there. I'm all about that. But the grill's this big. So I get like the littlest amount of airflow. It's so hard for that thing not to overheat. So I added this cooler and that cooler. And then more recently, how I really got it dialed in, I separated the transmission, which gets hot, from the engine coolant. And I ran my own standalone transmission cooler, and I cut a little square in the skid plate and I put a fan on it. And now when I flip a switch, I can manually turn that fan on and it'll cool my ATF, right? So the more you can find air and the more you can run fans and the more you can separate, you can get a lot more cooling capacity, really. And if you can separate the supercharger or turbocharger from the regular engine coolant, you can cool it a lot better. And that's what they've done.
So my car has probably like in the barrel picture is probably like this big.
Okay.
Can I fit it to have a big, if I do it bigger, would it change anything, or is that the max my car would get?
It's built like that because they've run calculations and they know really what your car needs. And so if your car's stock, you can do whatever you want, but you're probably wasting your time. Let's say that you put a Hemi in there, you're probably going to want to make that mo bigger, right? Makes sense? So like it's much mo bigger is going to be much mo better. But you see, when the car's stock like that, I wouldn't mess with that. You could do whatever you want just for fun, but yeah. But think of it from an engineering standpoint. If this engine was amazing, but the only thing holding it back was that they needed a bigger intercooler, they're going to do that. Like typically, they're not going to choke the engine out by the size of the intake tubing when everything else is there. Back in the day, they used to do stupid stuff like that. But now they're trying to get the fuel economy standards, the emission standards. To purposely starve an engine for air is counterproductive to the government standards. I don't think so. I bet you got everything you need. Truth be told, if you get a cold air intake, you're not realistically going to gain either any power or any substantial power. It will change the sound. Most of the time people are doing cold air intakes because it goes boop like that. So there's probably not a lot of room for improvement knowing the year of your vehicle. If it was a 70 something, you could probably improve some things. They weren't trying that hard back then. They didn't have to yet. Cool. So, all right, look at the intercooler. You could have an intercooler down in front of the radiator and condenser. You could have them top mounted, side here, there, ABC, wherever you want to be able to get airflow, that would be good. And then here's super aftermarket stuff. When we're running these boosted applications, that's very hard on the fuel. So sometimes what we'll do, we'll inject either water or methanol. The main reason that we're going to do this is it's going to convert vapor into gas. And we do vapor into gas. It absorbs massive amounts of heat in the change of state. So this is like a little mini AC lesson. If you put a drop of water in there and that drop of water evaporates to steam, it's actually sucking out a whole bunch of BTU heat energy. So now what's the advantage to that in performance? Heat energy was absorbed from something into the water to make it into a vapor. So now, where did the heat energy come from? The air around it. And if the heat energy was stolen from the air around it, now what's the air's temperature? Cooler. Cooler. This is a good way to cool it. We'll actually inject water or methanol or something. Okay, so not manufacture, but now you guys can see supercharging, turbocharging is amazing, but heat is a problem. Makes sense? And when it's hot, you know, we're running into engine damage, loss of power, potentially pre-ignition and whatnot. So that's an aftermarket solution. Now, who knows what a wastegate is? Wastegate doesn't do su-tu-tu-tu. That's the blow-off valve. The wastegate is on the exhaust side. Okay, so if we look at the exhaust flow, ready? Here is exhaust. Exhaust gases are going out like this. Okay. What the wastegate does is it'll either force all the exhaust gas to go through the turbine, and if it all goes through the turbine's going to speed up. Can you visualize it? Instead, the wastegate will be like, wait a minute, hold on a minute, and it'll open up, and now the exhaust gas can go through the wastegate, and look where it goes. What's this doing? Bypassing. It's bypass. The exhaust is being directed away from the turbine. So if our turbine's, you know, kind of slow, I want to send the exhaust gas to the turbine, spin up, spool it. But then what happens if you want 10 psi and it starts to hit 10 psi? What should you do? Yeah, exactly. Divert it away from it, right? So get like, no, like get out of there. Get bypass that. We're gonna essentially, I don't know, how would you say, waste it, right? That's why it's a wastegate. Wastegate is either gonna send it through the turbine or waste it away and bypass it. And by the way, you just jogged my memory. When I said bypass, and then I was thinking divert, those supercharger and blow-off valves, those supercharger bypass valves and blow-off valves, sometimes the manufacturers will call it diverter valves because they'll divert the air back into the air intake from the charge tubing. So if you ever heard the term diverter valve, that's a manufacturer's term for like a bypass valve too. All right, so now you guys kind of get the wastegate. Let's pause on that moment because wastegate failure, you have to understand which way it fails. If your wastegate was stuck open, this is open right here. If this wastegate is open, what's that going to do to your boost? Low boost. If it's under boost, a stuck open wastegate makes sense. What if it's stuck closed? Overboost it. Exactly. So see, a lot of times the ASE will ask you to differentiate between the two. It's not hard as long as you understand it. Cool. What controls the wastegate? Anybody know? Well, it's neither. The wastegate is on the turbo. So for example, here's an aftermarket wastegate. You bolt this wastegate on. I've seen them where it's a bolt. You can loosen up a little jam nut and turn the bolt in. What controls that wastegate is you, the technician. You want more boost? Loosen it up. You want less boost? Close it down, right? So they have fully aftermarket adjustable wastegates. How much boost do you want? And then you got to actually put a gauge on it and rev it and see when the wastegate starts to divert it away. Make sense? But you think that's the norm? That's not the norm. How do you think the factory's going to do it? On the old school cars, it was actually a boost reference line, and the boost reference line would go to the wastegate, like something like this. And if you had a lot of boost, don't you see how it would, let's see, the boost reference line. Yeah, the boost reference line would push to the right. So if you had a lot of boost, it would start to push on this valve. The more boost you had, the more it would open the valve. What would that do? Yeah, that would waste it away. Yeah. But then what happened when you didn't have enough boost? You wouldn't have a lot of pressure pushing to the right. This spring in the wastegate would push it to the left. So what would that do? Make more boost. Send it all through the turbine. So there was mechanical wastegates, and all they needed was a boost reference line, and that was it. Now pause right there. What if the boost reference line was cut? What's the wastegate going to do?
It could stay shut.
Let me add to that. The wastegate has a spring. It's trying to push it to the left. The boost line is trying to pull it to the right. If the boost line is cut, it can't pull it to the right. It'd be closed all the time. You'll overboost the crap out of that thing. Yeah, absolutely. You will absolutely, if you don't give it a boost reference, it will absolutely overboost. Make sense?
What if it's cut and an intake pressure sinks?
Well,
Then it would be open because you'll have no pressure closing.
this only has one. So actually right here, this is a mechanical wastegate. You just got to know that the more boost it gets, the more it's to the right, and the less boost it gets, the more it's to the left. But there's only one.
Loses the spring.
It's possible, sure. Let's say that spring got worn out and that spring's having a hard time closing it. It might waste too much. Absolutely. That would be just called a stuck open wastegate.
Oh, because it would be too weak.
Yeah, it'd be too weak to really close it all the way, and it would waste too much. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Usually the wastegate's built into the turbo. It's part of the turbo. They kind of come together. Sure, but like that's not what we do. You know, like you buy a turbo, it comes with a wastegate. You'd assume it's going to be the right one. Now the turbo manufacturer has to figure some of that out. Yes, for sure. But we're going to look at it as what's the failure going to be to you? It's very possible that vacuum line, the boost reference line gets cut, chewed, clogged, cracked, dry rotted, whatever. That's something you're going to see. A turbo manufacturer putting in the wrong spring, possible. You get the concept good, not likely.
I guess the better functionality part, like turbo company.
It's
If you bought something bigger than that.
yes. Yes. This would be, it'd come with it. It comes together. They're going to all come together. So if we were to jump back real quick to, there you go. There's your wastegate right there. See how it's bolted on there? That's your wastegate actuator. Your boost line is here. Your boost line is going to push this over or pull this over depending on what the pressure is on that little tiny hose right there. So if you get a new turbo, it's going to come with that, generally speaking.
What's
Cool.
external?
Technically this is an external wastegate. You notice it's not part of it. Now, if we were to go with, and I'm happy to jump on those. Those are good questions. If I were to look at not an amazing picture.
Doesn't it make it sound like it's cutting up too? Like external?
They can do a lot of different things. I'll bite on this. This is a legit one. We're gonna do a electronic wastegate. All right, well these are actually wastegates. I'm gonna do a turbo OEM. I'm looking for like an OEM one. Here you go. This is an OEM turbo right here. All right, so if we look at this, you guys can see this is a wastegate that's actually electronic. It's going to get a connection. There's going to be an electrical connector on it. This is going to be ECM controlled. This ECM is going to actually move this wastegate rod. That's really common. They wouldn't necessarily specify that it's internal or external or integrated or not, but an electronic wastegate, the way we diagnose those is all computerized. You can actually command this one to open and close with the scan tool. If this was defective, a lot of times they'll set a code. If it didn't set a code and it was stuck, you could command it to move and you'd notice this linkage just wouldn't move. So this is current. The talk about the boost pressure line, it's legit, but it's old. The new stuff is going to be computer controlled. So if you think about why computer controlled, it's all about fuel economy and emissions, right? they can manipulate your boost pressure to meet your fuel economy emissions. Additionally, they can play around with, let's say you have a vehicle with multiple drive modes. They can actually change your amount of boost on those electronic wastegates with the PCM. So if you put it in like race mode, you can have it make more boost. If you put it in grandma mode, you can have it make less boost, be quieter, these types of things. So that's a little bit more current and modern. Aftermarket, we covered a little bit. So wastegates, you should be pretty decent now. They deal with the exhaust side of things. So if you're trying to change your boost over here, the wastegate vents the exhaust. Let's just say you got it, once again, we talked about this once, you got it on really high RPM, second gear, you slap the throttle closed because you go and decel into a turn. That turbocharger, turbine, and impeller are really spinning fast. They're spooled. They're making a lot of boost. The wastegate can close, yes, but you've already got air in the charge tubing. Make sense? You've already got a bunch of air in the charge tubing. What are you going to do with it? That's where we come into the blow-off valve. The blow-off valve, or sometimes the diverter valve, or a lot of times we call it diverter valve, that's going to be like this. That's going to be in the intake side, and it's going to deal with the excessive pressure that's on the intake and vent it to atmosphere, or from the factory, divert it back into the intake, which is going to sound like, you can't really hear it. For fun, one time, we took an RX-7 that has a factory diverter valve that diverts the boost pressure back into the intake really silently, and we unplugged it from there and just like sent it upwards, and all of a sudden it goes, it was like, oh, that sounds a lot better. Part of the thing is they have to divert it back into the intake for hydrocarbon emissions reasons, but it also quiets it, which kind of a bummer. Makes sense? So you guys understand, this is for excess pressure on the intake side. This is as simple commonly as a spring. If you don't want more than 15 PSI in your intake side, you put a 15-pound spring. If you let off the gas and that bumps the pressure up to 16 PSI, it opens up a little valve and it goes, that's it. Not that complicated. Pretty simple, really. If you added an aftermarket one, is that your question?
Like when you hear the turbo flutter, I
Oh,
always heard that was like a back, like it was spinning backwards.
nah, no. You heard a wives' tale. The turbo is going to spin the right direction, but when you hear this flutter, if it does have an actual aftermarket blow-off valve, you're just on the verge of like tripping this spring at whatever PSI it's at. That's it. It's got the pressure cooker's got a blow-off valve. Exactly what it's got. Yep, that's it right there. Nah, you hear all sorts of stuff. No, it's a good question.
Bro, it's a spring. I'll get another one, but you don't want one. Bro, I heard it. Just walk it off.
Pause. I'll take that. All right, settle down back there. All right, it was a good question. Okay, let's say that we didn't have the blow-off valve. They'll always have something to bypass it back into the intake manifold. Okay, makes sense? So if you look at, this is where your intake air is. There's your air filter, correct? If you have excessive pressure in here in the charge piping, we'll just divert it right back to here. You won't hear much. You'll hear like basically nothing. But if you close the throttle really fast, we're not gonna force that air into the engine. The throttle's closed. There's nowhere for it to go. We'll just simply divert it off back into the big intake near your air filter. That's it. You just. I don't see how it would. If you vent it externally, you're getting rid of it. If you vent it back into the air intake, you're getting rid of it. No, I don't see it. Like this right here, technically, the air can actually leave the air filter. It's not going to blow it back through. I see where somebody thought that. They think we're going to force it back through the turbo. No, it can leave the air filter, but you got to understand your air filter is designed to catch hydrocarbons. A lot of times it has a little charcoal mat right there. So if air leaves it, the air that's leaving it has been stripped of hydrocarbons. It's just about emissions. That's it. Whereas if you vent it to atmosphere without sending it through a charcoal mat, you just vented hydrocarbons. Shame on you.
Yeah, they have traps too, right? The intake system, and you can bang horsepower and take it off. At least on Mustangs, my friend.
Modifying emissions. In the meantime, China's throwing coal in that furnace as we speak. But over here, we're like, no, don't vent that little. And like in the meantime, more coal in that thing. You know, it's kind of crazy, but that's the real reason. So, you know, I'll help you get the facts straight. The reason that thing is there, it's emissions, and that's it. If a smog tech was pretty sharp, they'd know to open up that airbox and be like, did they cut it out? Because technically that's one of the things that smog techs are supposed to check for. And if they find you did, as like a consumer, you'd be like, you fail smog, go see the smog ref. Eddie, he's over there right now. Just be like, hey Eddie, I haven't seen you in a while. Like, how you doing? I got flagged. Or if you guys are professional technicians, they put you in jail for tampering with an emissions control device. It's happened, but probably not on your first offense. If you keep doing it, they will put you in jail. A dude just got out of jail. He was in jail 7 months, federal prison, for turning off exhaust EGR systems, exhaust gas recirculation, for customers on diesels. Tune it out. Went to jail. Just got out. Well, actually, he's still in home prison. Yeah. Some of those guys got fined mega bucks. And they're not. California's crazy. I get it. How? I mean, all I'm gonna say though, the weather's good though. No, it's the worst. I agree with that. True. All right, but I'll leave you with this. Those are federal standards though. So you know. All right. So the people who went to jail, they went to federal prison for doing that type of stuff. So you can claim ignorance if you don't know any better. You're probably going to be like fine, but like if they know that you're doing it, they're going to try to make an example out of you. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. All right, so you guys remember the electronic? This is what it looks like as a diagram, right? We can control this wastegate using solenoid. So rather than having the wastegate spring, we can just be like solenoid. I'll look at a pressure sensor, and when the boost pressure is too high, I'll have a solenoid do the wastegate. So what I really like these is, what boost pressure do you want? It's computer controlled. The solenoid controls when it does wastegate. So like, let's just say you took we'll make it the Blackwing. The Blackwing's the twin turbo V6. Those cars, people are bringing those to the tuners, and with a tune alone, they're picking up 80 horsepower. 80 horsepower on a tune. How is that? Number of reasons, but one of them is they'll actually tune the ECM to not have the solenoid activate the wastegate until later. They can raise the boost on HP tuners, just rewrite it. That's it. Because this is all computer controlled. If that's the case, why do you think the manufacturer is keeping the boost low? Fuel economy emissions are the main thing, as always. But additionally, they want to protect their engine. While the engine's new, if it breaks, they have to pay for it. So if they give it an aggressive tune, they got to pay for their own repairs. If somebody else is like, hey, if I do this tune, I get 80 horsepower, and then it blows up, they're like, hey, you modified it. And these cars do come out off the dealership with the turbo. But if they're OEM and they're not modified, that's the manufacturer's repair. That's under warranty, right? If you go in and you rewrite it, and now you're like, hey, you know what? I want 80 PSI a boost. You caused that failure, or whoever tuned it. Yeah, right? It may never make that. Your turbo will only make as much boost as it can spin up. But if you can get it spinning fast enough, this will actually wastegate it away. So you could probably block the wastegate off, and I don't think you'll make 80 PSI. But you never know. Cool. So you guys kind of get it? And there's your mechanical, like we were talking about the spring. Cool. You see your boost pressure signal right here. It goes on a hose right here, and it's got a diaphragm, and that's going to push or pull this, right? If it's got a lot of boost, it's pushing it to the right, wastegating it. If it doesn't have a lot of boost, the spring pulls it to the left, lets it keep being diverted into the turbine and spinning it up. Cool. And then when we start talking about the electronic, we're going to look at a lot of sensors. You should remember this: MAP, MAF, ECT, intake air, all these types of things. Like if your engine's cold, do you think you want a whole lot of boost? No, we chill out a little bit. Let's just let the engine warm up before we try to give it 27 PSI a boost. You know what I mean? So it's nicer when it's computer controlled for longevity because the computer can override dumb customers. Make sense? Like that's why the manufacturers go to computer control. They do have controls of things. Vacuum and pressure are really similar. Oh, and bypass solenoids, like we were talking about, how we can bypass. It's like a wastegate, but we also have bypass valves on the intake side too if we want. What if we have a turbo fail? What do you think some of the symptoms? We may have a mill. You know what that is? Check engine light, service engine soon. We talked about 2 different codes they set. Do you remember them? Underboost and overboost. Those are really common. So if you got a turbo that's worn out, what do you think it's going to set? Underboost. Yeah. If you've got a wastegate line that's cut, what do you think it's going to set? Overboost, right? So that's how we kind of go about it. But additionally, you could have a loss in power. If you have a boost gauge, you're going to see you're not making a lot of boost. A lot of cars don't have a boost gauge, so you're just going to be like, this thing's kind of sluggish. You may get noise from the turbocharger. You may get increased oil consumption. Why do you think? It sends oil to the center section, yes. But that should keep it out of the exhaust and that should keep it out of the intake unless the seals. Remember the seals? The center part spinning, because remember the turbine spins in the exhaust side and there's a shaft going through to the intake side. The bearings are in the middle, so we need to seal it so the oil stays inside to lubricate it. But if the seal is bad, now we have oil being pumped up into the center section. If the seal's bad, it's pumping it into the intake. And the intake's sucking it into the engine, and it's burning, and you get oil consumption. And that does happen. You can also have black smoke. Black would be excessive fuel. Black is rich. Why do you think you might get black smoke? Gas. Oil would be light blue gray, right? That's oil consumption. Antifreeze would be white, yeah, steam. But if it's black smoke, that would a lot of times be because you're under boosting, but your ECM is still spraying the full amount of fuel, right? So if your turbo's not pushing enough air, but your ECM is still spraying a lot of fuel, it'd be too rich, you'll get some black smoke. Yep, too much. What if it's over boosting? You could get engine detonation, pre-ignition sounds, potentially even overheating. Also, they're pretty fun to drive when they're over boosting. So you might get miles per mile. Okay, supercharger stuff, or turbocharger noise, I mean, you can actually get a boost air leak or a vacuum leak. Like sometimes if it's a charge air leak, it'll sound like a beep, beep when you're under wide open. So you'll be at idle, it'll be fine, and you'll accelerate and you just hear like beep. And you're like, what is that squeak? It'll actually be, let's say a hose has a little tear in it and it doesn't really leak, but when you pressurize it, the air will be screaming out of there like a whistle. And they're kind of hard to diagnose though, because it only does it under heavy loads and then it stops. And then you're like, where is this leak, right? So in a slide in a minute, I'll show you one of the ways to check for boost leaks. Split hoses, overboost, air leaks at different connections, carbon buildup. If you got a bearing failure, those can be like horrifically loud. If it's really bad enough, it'll seize up and it'll actually explode the turbo. So if you start to hear turbo sounds like a bearing sound, like growling, that's scary. And we could have some of these valves in op too. We talked about that loss of performance with low boost. Blue gray, that's oil. White is coolant. The black would be excessively rich air fuel. And then just keep in mind, these bearings that are inside, not this impeller, but the bearings that are inside, they're sensitive. So what do you think we should do if we have a turbocharged car more often? Yes, oil changes on turbo cars typically are more often than non-turbo. The engines are a little sensitive, but the turbos are very sensitive. So they'll a lot of times call for synthetic and a sooner oil change interval. Okay, so you all know. Just keep changing that oil. If it calls for it at 5, I do it at 5. If it calls for it at 10, I may do it at 5. I don't know. I think about it, but
Is it ever bad to do it too early?
no, you're just potentially wasting money. But like if you're doing it yourself, what's the oil change cost you? $35? It's not that much. Maybe 50 if it's a nice car. All right, but if you don't, and those bearings start to get the debris, remember that turbo's spinning really fast. That's a good way to kill the bearings sooner. I would not delay on oil changes on any car, but definitely not on turbocharged stuff. Cool. Make sure everything stays clean. Like if you get an air filter that gets a tear in it, this is all very sensitive to having debris go through it. So mice make a nest in your intake. Mice chew through the air filter. Mice nest gets sucked into the engine. Big problem. Mice nest gets sucked into the turbo. Even bigger problem. Right? They're just very sensitive. And so you can see like they can leak sometimes from the turbo internally. That's an internal leak. That's oil consumption, blue-gray. Sometimes externally. That's spots in the driveway. Both could be from the turbo. They could also be from the internal engine. Now, let's say that you have a boost leak. That's the squeak noise. You might get an under boost code if you have a boost leak. I have a couple tips and tricks. If you don't want to get real involved and you're not real scared of standing in front of a car that's being revved up at a high RPM, sometimes in gear, get it under boost and spray all your hoses with like a soapy water, Windex type of thing. Use some, even regular water, but soapy water ideally. If you put it under boost and there's a leak, what are you going to see? Bubbles, exactly. That's a little sketchy though. So the by the book way is going to be you buy an adapter and you can actually take the boost charge hose off, put an adapter in, reclamp it, put a hose fitting on there and a regulator, and you could pressurize it to 10 PSI, 15 PSI, or whatever. A lot of times though, you need one for the fitting and then you need to disconnect another one to cap it off. And you can pressurize the whole system and actually look for leaks without it running, without maybe dying. It does help. Same with the intercooler. Spray the intercooler. Intercoolers that are aluminum, they can leak and you'll see bubbles out the intercooler. It's not really rocket science, but it can be a little bit challenging at times. All right, so like this one, for example, we could potentially, if you guys can just barely tell, there's a little bit of smoke right there. One of the ways we can also do it is we can disconnect the hose and put a smoke machine in there and inject the whole system with smoke and then get a really bright light and see if you see smoke. Like this example, it's smoke coming out of the intercooler. It looked to me like maybe a rock came up and broke one of those passages, and now you have a boost leak. You got an under boost code, you got a check engine light on, and it was due to a rock damaging your front mounted air-to-air intercooler, right? Or water, whatever it is. Cool. Then when you go to do a bearing inspection, I actually have a video on this. Had one horrible noises, knew it was the turbo. I heard the noise, I put a stethoscope on it. You could just hear the bearing screaming. Said, yeah, you need a turbo. It was expensive. I pulled the old turbo out, just went ahead and grabbed this impeller, moved it up and down. The whole thing was loose, and the impeller was actually touching the housing, and it scored the housing all out. It was all scored up, right? So that's one of the ways you test them, both listening and visual too. All right, what if you wanted to test a blow-off valve? Remember the blow-off valve? It's got a spring, right? And let's say that we want up to 12 PSI. What should the spring do at 12 psi? Let it out. Yeah, so we'd actually use a little air pump and we could pump it up to 12 psi. And what should it do at 12? Yeah. So that's it. We're literally just pump it up to 12 with a gauge on it and see, this is just the blow off valve. Yep. Bypass valve, whatever. All right. What if it's an electronic wastegate and it has a pressure sensor? How do you think you diagnose a pressure sensor? Scan tool, yeah. Remember how we talked about map sensors? This is a map sensor. It's just a map sensor that measures pressure, not just vacuum. Same thing. Look at the reading on the scan tool. You may have to check the 5-volt reference, the ground, and the signal. It's not really any different. It's the same. And then similar, if we're going to test the electronic wastegate diagnosis, we can actually command this with a scan tool and verify that it moves. That's the way that I would do it, number one, first and foremost. And then a note, since it's one of the next things we cover, EGR is exhaust gas recirculation. It's an emission system. It's an emission systems that we cover in our very next lesson. But when you have EGR on turbo, the exhaust gas recirculation tends to put a lot of carbon on your turbocharger. So if you do have a vehicle, like particularly a diesel that has EGR, it's very hard on that turbo. Just FYI, if the turbos are all carboned up and stuff, and it's a vehicle that has EGR, like we knew that was going to happen. But what are you going to do? We need the EGR component of the vehicle to pass emissions. Make sense? Remember I told you somebody just got out of federal prison for tampering with emissions control device? What did I say he was turning off? Oh yeah, and it was saving the turbos on these fleets of diesel, so he was making a lot of money. They're like, man, when you turn off the EGR on our vehicles and block it off, the turbos last 5 times as long and all this type of stuff. And he's like, yeah, I'm the man. And then the government's like, you're going to jail, buddy. Did you do that? Yeah, but I was helping them. I'm keeping trucks on the road. These trucks carry your lunch, you politician. And they're like, jail. Makes sense? That's how it went. True story. You can look it up. Okay, so we're gonna roll into the next thing. You guys are gonna stick with me. Okay, we got this. This stuff is not that complex, but don't give up on me. We're rolling straight into variable valve timing. Quick overview. VVT uses a bunch of inputs. The ECM, remember the processing, the ECM considers what to do. And the output is actually going to be, it's going to control the timing for the cam. Okay, it's going to vary the valve timing. Look at all these inputs and be like, oh, let's vary it 10 degrees. How does it do it? Well, there's different types, but it's actually going to rotate the camshaft within the timing chain or the timing belt. It's pretty cool. All right, so why? Well, if you have VVTI, you can get smoother idle, increase in torque, especially in low to medium range. It eliminates the need for an EGR valve. What? Remember how we're saying EGR can kind of suck? We can do everything that an EGR can do without an EGR if we have very good variable valve timing. Right? Increases fuel economy, improves emissions control and performance. So if you can give me an increase in fuel economy, but also increase torque, you got my attention. I'm good with that. I don't particularly have a really strong feeling about this, about this, but if you can give me this, I'm interested. This I'm interested in. Now, I'm not the guy who cuts the cats off my cars. All my emission stuff is legit. I just don't wake up and be like, I really want to work on my car and fix it up so the NOx production levels are slightly lower parts per million. Nope, I'm not. I'm not gonna lie to you. However, I'm not tampering and deleting things. I'm making sure that it's how it was designed. Okay, cool. I will, however, try to get a little more power out of it. I will, however, try to get a little more MPG out of it. Okay. What would you do?
Is the Camaro tuned?
It's actually not even tuned. It's bone stock, minus a K&N carbon fiber intake, but no tunes, no none of that. My Hummer, though, that thing has been inside out, upside down, every which way. It's still got stock cats, though. Still got OEM cats, evap's fully functional. Like, I don't do like ridiculous, stupid stuff. It's just, understand what I'm saying. I just don't get really excited for like a parts per million reduction in carbon dioxide or something. You know, it's just not my thing. Mhm. Of course. Shouldn't it be?
Yeah, yeah, but
Hey, that's right. Save the manuals. I'm all about the cause.
you
Yeah.
said it was your wife's car, though. That's why I asked.
Yeah, no, there we looked at GTRs too. Yeah, it was a 50, but it was a good car. But do you know why we didn't get the GTR? She wanted the GTR. I told her it's automatic, and she says no way. And I said go check it out. And she went to the dealership, and she's like, "Can I see the GTR?" And they're like, "Yeah, it's right there." And she said, "Yeah, it's too bad it's only an automatic, or you know, we try to get it." And they're like, "It's not an automatic. It's a paddle shift." And she got in. Remember this? And she got in. She said, "Why does it say park?" And then that was it. And the salesmen are like, "Oh, like you can't call it anything other than automatic if it has park, not parking brake. It just has park. It has drive. We're done. There's no, if it says drive, we're out." Okay. Dude, if you can put it in drive and it'll shift itself, it's an auto, whether it's got dual clutch. I can get into the technical details of a dual clutch transmission, but if you put it in drive and it shifts itself, and when you're done, you put it in park, the conversation's over.
So my thought about that is, I feel like when you downshift in a manual, it sounds better than an auto.
Yeah, sure. No,
It sounds like
I agree.
you can hear the car.
Yeah, I agree. And it's a little more engaging. Okay, VVT now. VVT to me is a good thing. You can get increased power and increased fuel economy. Okay. However, a lot of this is going to discuss emissions as well. So you got to be aware of it, right? So VVT, if you look at this, it's going to allow the PCM to change a fixed camshaft profile. So what that means is when your cam is doing its thing, that's it. You can't make it bigger, make it smaller, make it shorter, make it longer. You can't do any of that with the actual cam. But what it allows us to do is start to change, ready? The relation based on operating conditions. So that means we can actually move the camshaft a little advanced or a little bit retarded without changing this chain. So this chain is going around this sprocket. This yellow tooth needs to be on that mark. Okay, that's in time. But internally, we can actually rotate the camshaft a little bit ahead to get it more advanced. This one, I saw those. There's different marks. I don't know about that mark. Oh, that one?
Yeah.
Nah, it's this one. It's this one on this one. So if you were to go pre-VVT, there were people taking their cars and they were purposely moving their timing belt or chain a tooth advanced, and they would get more power at the drag strip or at the circle track. They would get more racing power. The negative was it wouldn't want to idle. It would have poor vacuum. It was just not very drivable at low RPMs, but they would gain horsepower at high RPMs. Cool? But you can't do that. I mean, technically you could, but you can't do that because you're modifying your emissions. Your emissions are going to be much higher at idle now. So we got this system where it's like, hey, we're going to set you at the base time, but if we want, we'll actually rotate the camshaft inside the sprocket, and the computer is controlling the detailed camshaft timing. This is not ignition timing. The computer's been controlling ignition timing forever, for a long time. But variable valve timing, we actually control the cam timing, which controls the opening and the closing of the valves, okay? And it can improve all sorts of things, including fuel economy, horsepower, and of course, emissions. Here are some of the components. A VVT solenoid, that's the oil part. The computer, the PCM, controls a solenoid, which controls the oil flow. The oil flow gets sent up in passages. See these little, it almost looks like pipes, but they're built into the cover. That's going to send oil up to this housing, which is going to send oil into this sprocket. Sometimes they'll call it a phaser or an actuator. The actuator can actuate advanced clockwise, counterclockwise is retarded. Just late, behind schedule, if you will. Cool, so that's what it does. Now, if you were to look at this, if we were to pump oil on this side, can you see how it's going to rotate the red part counterclockwise? What if we were to pump oil on the left side? It would rotate it clockwise, right? That's what's inside of that mystery actuator or phaser right there. No, it's engine oil pressure. We'll pump oil pressure to the solenoid. If we want to advance it, we'll tell the solenoid, send oil on this pipe. That'll push that internal gear in the advanced direction. Or if we want to retard it, this valve, the PCM will move the solenoid, and the solenoid will say, no more oil here, send the oil here, and that'll push it retarded. So it's going to go advanced or retarded depending on what the oil pressure does, which is ultimately controlled through the solenoid by the PCM. Computer controls it. Computer looks at crankshaft and camshaft, looks at its programming and says, advance it, retard it, advance it more. 10 degrees, 8 degrees, 5 degrees, 12 degrees. So it's constantly varying. That's why it feels so smooth. That's why the power comes on so nice. It's very seamless. Make sense? You guys understand what makes this move, right? Well, this is the actual oil control valve. So we send oil in right here. And if we want to do advance, we're going to move this valve to the left. That's going to connect this to this, and that's going to advance it, right? What if we want to retard it? We're going to move it to the right. That's going to block off the advanced side, which is going to drain it out the vent, right? Cool. And we're going to move it to the right, which is going to then connect oil pressure to the retard side. Okay, make sense? And so what's making this valve move left and right? Did you catch what I said? Yes, exactly. The PCM in this case controls the electromagnetism of this solenoid to move it left, to move it right, to move it left, to move it right. So it's advance, it's retard, it's advance, it's retard. Okay, great. Sound pretty good? So right here, we had the exhaust valve and the intake valve, and we can actually vary them potentially up to 50 degrees right here. We can vary them a lot, but the PCM does it. So the PCM looks at several sensors and commands that OCV valve. Cool. So it's a nice thing. You have to know the hardware parts, and then we'll talk about some of the failures. Just remember this. We need oil pressure right here. And so if you get like debris in your oil, this is not going to be happy. So similar, like this is a slightly different design. You're going to see this concept is going to be applied in 6, 7, 8 different manufacturers. I had to add the 8. We're not stopping with the first 2 numbers. Moving on. In fact, I'm not going to use, I'm going to just say 7 or 8. Just 7, 8. Okay? No, you're fired. All right. So this design, we're controlling this solenoid. Now, Toyota sometimes does call it the VVTI controller, which gets a little bit complicated. They typically more mean phaser. Phaser is what most people call them. Sometimes they're called other names, right? ECM's controlling the pulses, advance it. ECM's controlling the pulses, retard it. ECM's controlling the pulses, and it's just saying 50-50, just hold it. Keep it at that spot. Cool? Pretty simple. But overall, the reason it's a bit complicated is because the PCM has to look at everything. It has to know what's the coolant temperature, what's the oil temperature, what's our map sensor, what's our MAF sensor. It has to look at all these things to fine tune exactly where it wants the VVTI to be. That's why this diagram is complex. It's looking at a lot of stuff to make a decision. Cool. So a lot of things play into that part. So if we look at phasers, this is our nice cutaway. You guys can see it's kind of oily, right? That's because we send oil up into here. If you wanted this, if you look at this part right here, you see this? We're going to call it the vane. If you want the cam to advance, we need to pump oil behind this vane. And where's that going to move it? Like clockwise, right? That would be advance. But it doesn't move it on one vane. It's going to send oil here, 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 and here. And if it's all behind the vein, it's going to push the vein forward like this, like that. That's advance. Then if we want to retard it again, it's going to push on the right side and move it all the way to the left. All the way to the left is retarded. All the way to the right is advance. Yep. So that's what it's going to do. Ultimately, what makes these veins move? Describe it. Oil, yes. The main failure on these VVT systems ends up being oil related. So if you got a car that calls for 5W20 and you're like, no, I read on the forum to run 1050, well, you can do whatever you want, but if you put the wrong oil in there and you end up with VVT codes, we kind of probably could have predicted that, right? So the PCM is programmed to know if I pulse this solenoid this much, right? Because remember, it looks like this. If I pulse this solenoid this much, I'm expecting it to move to this middle line. But if you have oil that's too thick, it might move it too far or not far enough. I really don't know. And that's why it's really critical on these. You got to put the right oil in the car. The oil can't be just never changed. I've seen some cars, they come in for a VVT concern. The very first thing I do, pull the dipstick. No oil in it. Shocking. What do you think's wrong with the VVT? There's no oil in the thing. So it'd probably be like, hey, first off, you need an oil change. Secondly, let me check it for leaks. Thirdly, what is wrong with you? Like, seriously, you got to get oil changed. The light came on. It told you to change the oil. Like, oh, I'll get it eventually, or whatever. So you can mess up the VVT. The other thing I've seen is they'll consistently delay the oil change. You ever seen oil that hasn't been changed and over and over and over? It gets sludged up. How you think this is going to work with sludge in there? This is one of the main failures. You get an engine that's sludged up, it's going to be very hard to bring the VVT back, right? And guess what? If it says to have this 10 degrees advanced and it sends the oil pressure and it doesn't advance at 10 degrees, you get codes for VVT. Crankshaft correlation, VVT this, VVT that. So you didn't change your oil, it sludged up, now you can't pass smog. Get what I'm saying? It does though, because again, what's the VVT do? It lowers emissions. So if your VVT is not functioning, your emissions are no longer lowered. Check engine lights on, you fail smog. Also, you lost power and you lost fuel economy. So what good was that? I don't know. Cool. Now let's talk about brands. Who likes Beamer? You're just too shy. All right, go for it. BMW is always Germany. They got to be unique. BMW calls it Vanos. It's like VVT and German's like Vanos. Like that, Vanos. Okay, now to make it even worse, Vanos is variable valve timing. When we get into variable valve lift, they actually started calling that VVT because it's Valvetronic. And it was like, whatever. So make it simple. When it's variable valve timing, they're all going to work very similar. They may have very different names. Variable valve timing for BMW is Vanos. Valvetronic, a bit different. And they even started calling it VVT. Then Vanos was on the intake side. See that? Then they're like, you know what? If it's good on the intake, where else should we put it? On the exhaust, dual Vanos. Yeah, there you go. Dual Vanos was intake and exhaust. Cool. Valvetronic is different. Valvetronic is not so much about the timing. If you look, it's going to increase or decrease the lift of the valve. So variable valve timing advances are retarded. What does Valvetronic do? More lift or less lift. And honestly, I've heard them call it Valvetronic. That's the best way. But I've heard other people abbreviate this to VVT. If someone says VVT for BMW, they may be talking about Valvetronic, and that has nothing to do with valve timing. That has to do with valve lift. You see what I'm saying? You see why I got a chip on my shoulders with this German crap, right? I'm just saying. It has more to do with, the broken cross too. I mean, I got issues. I just don't like how they think. They got to be different. They'd be like, oh, I know. let's call our variable lift VVT and let's call our VVT Vanos. I'm like, thank you for complicating everything for me. All right, cool, but that's kind of the difference. Okay, VVT-IE was Toyota specific system. You're going to get to see quite a few of these. They actually use electric motors to advance a retard up to 40 degrees. Okay, so back in the day, this was VVT. VVT-IE, they get rid of the oil. The oil's gone. They're actually using high-speed AC motors to fine-tune these. This is an AC motor. This will actually advance or retard the timing directly. Do you want to know why? Faster, speed. So when we start talking about variable valve timing and eliminating an EGR, we can move the VVT so fast, we can have exhaust gas get sucked back into the intake to do the same things that exhaust gas recirculation does. But if you want to do that, oil takes time. These electric motors that are brushless are instant, they're fast. So VVT-IE, it's the same variable valve timing, but it doesn't use oil. It uses electric motors. Cool. It's a good system. You can see here the mechanical parts, right? More pieces, you know, on the hydraulic. This is going to be more. They have them on like a whole bunch of Toyotas now. Yeah, this is on like any new model Toyota Lexus. So if you think about it, if this doesn't use oil pressure, it's not quite as sensitive to oil pressure faults and defects. Which means the next point, which I already kind of covered, low oil pressure will cause all sorts of issues with this. So one of the things that we want to do is actually check the oil pressure before we get into too much troubleshooting. The problem could be before the actuator. It could be the oil pump. It could be the oil pickup that's sludged up. It could be in the passageways because they're clogged with the debris due to lack of maintenance. It could be that the oil level's low. It could be that the oil's the wrong viscosity. Sometimes I'll check it, and if it seems sketchy, I'll be like, start with an oil change so I know your oil weight is correct, your viscosity, right? You could also, if it's on the scan tool, check your oil pressure. If it's got an oil pressure sensor, that's a good way to get started. Cool. You might have to actually use the gauge, unfortunately. And we could have a lot of faults like that are just related to base engine issues, the stuff we covered before. Why do we have low oil pressure? Why does it have consumption, etc.? That's all in there. So if you wanted to do like some more testing of those oil control valves, one of the best ways to do it is you'd go in with the scan tool and you could do this. See what it says? What's that say? Actuate. What's that mean? Go in, it's an output, and tell it with the scan tool. Tell it with the scan tool, advanced or retard, and then see if it changes. That's one of the ways to test it. You'll actuate it. Cool. And if you, for some reason, can't use the scan tool, you could actually jump it, which is a little sketchy. I'd probably do the scan tool if you can. And you should be able to see if the solenoid changes, moves, clicks, right? If you think it's the solenoid, listen to it and use the scan tool. Advanced retard. Is it clicking? No. Then you might troubleshoot it electrically. Advanced retard. Is it clicking? Yes. Then electrically, it seems to be good. You might have to look more like mechanically. Another one of the failures I've seen was an OCV valve clicking, working good electrically, but it just didn't seem to move the timing. So my logic was, let me look at it. I pull the OCV valve out, and you know what I found? A screen that's a filter, totally clogged with metal. Where'd the metal come from? Yeah, so what do you think I should tell the customer?
New engine.
Yeah, like that's what I'm gonna say. Like, hold up, you came in for a check engine light. It was related to variable valve timing. These are my steps. There's a bunch of metal in this oil control valve. I don't know where the metal came from. This is going to cost you a lot of money. Well, it was running fine. Yeah, I understand. I'm just letting you know. This metal came from somewhere. I don't know where. Well, how long will it last? I don't freaking know. I'm just letting you know, like, that metal is coming off of a bearing or something's wearing. Like, this is a big thing. See what I'm saying? So that was a good clue. But electrically, that solenoid worked. You get what I'm saying? but why didn't it actuate the VVT to move, advance, or retard? Think about it. It was clogged up. So did the oil pressure make it to where it was supposed to make it to move the little veins? No.
Nothing was getting moved to that.
You couldn't move through all that metal. That's right. Exactly. So sometimes, you know, this could be complicated, but other times it was like, yeah, I diagnosed that there's metal in the end of the screen and it's plugged up and no oil will even go through it. But what's that mean? In this case, you got a big expensive problem coming and I don't know when.
3 months.
Who knows? Who knows? The other thing is, if it's electrical, you can test the solenoids electrically, right? If you measure a solenoid, do you think it should read OL?
No.
That would be an open coil in the solenoid, so that'd be a fail, right? So if you actuate it, advance, retard, and you hear nothing, you'd be like, is this thing even working? Then you could measure the resistance of the solenoid. If it's OL, that solenoid's no good. You can also verify it's getting 12 volts in ground, but these get a signal, so it's probably not going to get 12 volts consistently. You know, it's going to get a pulse, right? If we want to see a pulse, what tool would we use? Look at that next screen. Boom. If you want to see if that oscilloscope, if you want to see if that signal is there, you could scope it and be like, yeah, but you knew, but that was good. You can see if the PCM is sending it the correct signal, right? So sometimes the PCM isn't sending it the right signal because maybe a wire got chewed or whatever. So you might be like, let me probe this oscilloscope, let me probe this OCV connector with an oscilloscope and see, is it getting this waveform? If it's getting a nice waveform, which is a little hard to see, sorry for that, then I know that it's getting the right signal, but it's still not working. I know the PCM is good. I know the wiring's good. I know my problem's in the OCV, right? So you're going to see again and again components when they don't work. You want to see, is it something mechanical like the metal in there? Is it something electrical like the PCM's not sending a signal or like it's lost in the wire? Or if it's getting its signal, maybe resistance check it to see if it's the solenoid itself. It's a lot of knowledge just to diagnose a stupid check engine light, isn't it? But that's why people are charging good money, because it's not that easy to do. It's true. All right, so if you look at this is kind of like similar to what we were showing. Electrical testing is over here. That's with your meter. Mechanical testing, hard to do. Sometimes you got to visualize it, pull it out. There's different designs. Like this is a more simple one. This one's going to send oil here for advanced or here for retard. That's it. Pretty simple. This is the magnetically controlled one. So this is going to actually use a magnet to move the parts inside. Those are decent. There's that phaser type. That's got the veins. There's a good shot of the OCV. When I saw it, all this was metal, metal, metal. And the filter, I think might have been on the end on mine. On this one, it's going to be wherever the oil pressure feed is, which is probably the middle one. Totally packed. Cool. Now, VVT is good. You got it. Advanced retard. Cool. What about VVEL? That's going to control both how long and how far the valves are open. When we start to combine them, it gets a little complicated, but it's going to, timing is at what point, right? So how early or how late? Cool. When we're talking about this, it's how early or how late, but also how little or how far it's open. You get what I'm saying? That's why this isn't VVT. It's variable valve event and lift. This is actually a Nissan term. Variable valve event means the event is at what time, like when. That's timing. Lift is how far, how much, how far. Make sense? So they're varying when and how far. Why do you think, you know why we vary when, right? We can gain power by advancing or retarding and give it good drivability and give it low emissions and good fuel economy. Why do you think we change how far open? No. True. So sort of how long, true. So this combines both for how long, that's mostly timing, but also At high RPMs, remember how we struggled to hit that 100% volumetric efficiency? Yes. Well, if I were to open that door a little bit for a long time, everybody get in here, right? But what if I only opened it up for a second? We wouldn't have enough, right? What if I had a double door and I opened it for a second? We could get double the people. Cool. So the VVEL is opening the valve further under high RPMs to try to increase that volumetric efficiency. Make sense? So they get good power out of these. These are pretty nice, but not every car has it. So if it says something along the lines of VVL, VVEL, it's probably going to be, they never have variable lift without variable timing. But they do have variable timing without variable lift. See what I'm saying? You always have timing and you may have lift. So for example, Audi's valve lift. This is actually going to move these lobes, and that's going to use different lobes. VTEC's the most common. Let's use VTEC. You guys know what VTEC actually is? It's kind of like VVT, but it's actually got different lobes. So if you look at these arrows, these are your base lobes. Okay, you see the middle one? The middle one, I don't know if you can quite tell, but the middle one is taller. So what they'll do is when you're running like low RPMs, you'll be on these two outside lobes. But then you've heard the term when VTEC cracks, when VTEC hits, you know, huh? My motorcycle has VTEC, you know. It does. I wouldn't even joke around with you. It's a 2002 Honda VFR 800. It's got VTEC. The VTEC hits at 7,600 RPMs. If I'm leaned over in a turn and VTEC hits, it's really gnarly. It's either going to spin the back tire or I'm going to pull a wheelie in the turn. So like I got to keep a little bit of an eye on my tack when I'm trying to do, you know, be stupid. But it makes it kind of fun. Well, it depends on the year and the engine. So VTEC can come in as low as 3,000 RPMs. So let's just say it's a Honda Civic and it comes in at $3,000. What actually happens is under 3, you're on these small lobes that makes it nice, drivable, good fuel economy, everything is good. Then you punch it wide open, then all of a sudden you feel a little boost. And you're like, whoa, what was that? That was cool. I remember my very first time I felt VTEC. My mom was looking to buy a new car and we drove a Civic. And all of a sudden you felt a little boost. Like, wow, this car's got a lot of pickup. And it was like, yeah, what was that? I'm like in the back seat, I'm like 7. And I'm like, that was cool. And then they're like, what is that? And the guy's like, oh, it's yeah, when it's VTEC, it automatically adds more gas. And I was like, well, why don't they just add more gas from the start? That was me at 7 in the back seat. I have problems. But come to find out, the salesman was full of baloney. What it really is, when VTEC hit, it stepped off of these small little weak cams and it went to this big old race cam. And it was like, hey, that was pretty cool, right? So he was dead, just totally lied right there. Probably just didn't know. He was probably working at Foot Locker the week before. Make sense? All right, but there you go. Boom. Step up on the big cam, right? So low speed cam, when VTEC hits, you're going to actually see a little pin get pushed over by oil. And the oil is controlled by a solenoid. The VTEC solenoid lets the oil go, pushes a pin over, the rocker locks, and that engages to this cam lobe. It's not real variable though. It's off or it's on. And so that's why VTEC can be a little abrupt. It feels pretty cool, right? That's actual VTEC. So it's not truly varying the timing. If you think about it, it's using a full separate cam lobe. Pretty cool. Camtronic is Mercedes. That's going to be like we're starting to get into kind of like variable valve timing, kind of like variable event and lift, but we're starting to use it to the extreme where it'll actually shut cylinders down. So using Camtronic, it can allow certain cylinders to be disabled through closing the valves and turning off fuel to the injectors. Whoa. Why would we want to do that? Fuel economy emissions. Come on now. You know the deal. You know the deal now, right? So as we do diagnosis, again, we talked about VVT faults. You got to know the system. If you have a noise, if you have a concern, you got to know about that system, whether it's VTEC, VVTi, VVTIE, etc. You could have oil problems. You can use your stethoscope to listen to failed components, etc. You may even have to verify the timing on the timing chain. But another thing is they're going to use cam and crank position sensors. So you'd revert back to how do we test cam and crank sensors? Remember we looked at the waveforms? Waveform's going to tell you a lot. Cool. So that's the type of diagnosis you're going to see. You can also use the scan tool. Sometimes there's, like if you change a component, sometimes you have to do an initialization or a relearn, a crank cam position relearn. That's going to relearn the base relationship between the two, like get them back into sync and learn their new perfect relationship. So that's normal. So if you change, let's say like sometimes a cam position sensor, sometimes you actually need to do a relearn or it'll give you some weird crank cam correlation issues. But other times, we can look at crankshaft and camshaft RPM on the scan tool. Most of the time, we're going to go full-blown oscilloscope. So right here, the yellow is the crank and the green is the cam, I think. But we can look at these, and what's really interesting, if you do VVT and you actuate it, do you know what these two should do? Say the yellow and the green, they should change, right? Advanced, retarded. You should actually be able to actuate that and see those move. So if you have a problem with the crank or cam sensor, the VVT has no way to verify if it's working or not. You see what I'm saying? So there's a little bit of stuff on the outskirts of, oh, I got a VVT issue. Could I actually have a crankshaft or camshaft position sensor issue too? Oh, I think I've got a VVT issue, but you look at this and this cam is over here to the left. That could be like the camshaft is a little retarded. How'd the cam get retarded? Maybe the timing belt jumped. Maybe the timing chain jumped. Now you know that your base timing's an issue. You don't need VVT parts. You need to redo the timing. Make sense? So good diagnosis. And then another thing that they'll do is they'll vary intake. This isn't VVT, but they'll actually vary how your intake sends the air to the cylinders. And that can be better for torque or horsepower. Not on this one. This one's an intake air control valve. It'll actually vary your length, variable intake, or sometimes they'll change the way that the air flows to change the sound. This is a hard thing to place in curriculum, so I put it with VVT. Now we're on to our final thing of the day, and this one is a thing people tend to be passionate about. It's variable displacement. What do you think variable displacement means? Come on, Mason, you got this. What's variable displacement? BMW does some stuff with that, but let's just say I had a V8, but that's a little bit bigger than what I need. Could I make it like a 4-cylinder?
Yes.
I'd be varying display. What if I had a 6-liter V8 and then I shut down 4 cylinders? What would it effectively be? A 3-liter, right? So think of cylinders, yes, but displacement is the volume of the cylinders. So if my V8 was 6.0, I shut down 4, I make it like a 3.0. Make sense? Why?
Then you can do whatever you want.
Freedom.
Yes.
Rah! I like it, but why do you think the manufacturers are actually doing it? Fuel economy emissions, fuel economy emissions, fuel economy emissions, right? That's what I'm saying, right? So this system, no customer, this is on Silverados, okay? How many Silverado people you know that are like, yeah, let me make my truck a 4-cylinder one sometimes? No, nobody wants, that's a,
V8s anymore.
true. But this system was a V8 unless it changed over to 4-cylinder. So that's what I mean by displacement. This is something that changes your 6-liter or 3-liter, but there's different ways to do it, okay? So I'm going to show you the different ways. You like that answer? All right. This is it. We're deactivating cylinders. So it's variable displacement because we're deactivating cylinders. Cool? The overall is variable displacement. All right, so we'll go over each of them. Here's the DOD. You might call it cylinder deactivation. You may call it active fuel management. All right, so here's what happens. If you look at this whole manifold right here has a bunch of solenoids and valves. if they activate a solenoid, it'll turn off the oil to the lifter and the lifter will shut down. So that means that valve won't open and close. So if you have cylinder 1 and they're opening and closing, that cylinder's working. But if you have cylinder 4 and the solenoid comes on and it stops opening and closing the valves, what's that piston do? The piston goes up and down, but there's no intake. There's no compression. There's no exhaust. It just sits there. It's just pumping a cylinder with no valves open and closing. So it's dead. It's disabled. So guess what we do with the injector on that cylinder? Shut it down. So the PCM says, close your injector, stop opening those valves. That cylinder's dead to me. And it's going to do it on 4 cylinders, but it's going to 4 alive and 4 will be dead. That's the displacement on demand. You just made your 6-liter into a 3-liter. They started on that old one. I think they started on that. And then this got common in like 2014, 15, and now still current. Cool. This part's bolted down. It gets oil pressure and it deactivates. Mercedes does it. Honda does it. Quite a few companies do the similar thing. Okay. However, let's say that you want to diagnose it. And this is pretty interesting because I literally just diagnosed one of these right now. The vehicle came in, had a misfire. All right. What do you guys think a misfire is going to be? Could be spark, right? I check spark and guess what? It has spark. How did I check the spark? Spark tester. Boom, it worked. Cool. Then all right. So then I go to put the compression tester in. See, you're thinking. I'm trying to remember, it either had 60 or 0, but in this case, let's say 0 PSI. Is that going to fire? No. What am I selling the customer? Get him a new car, get him whatever. Actually, technically, if your compression's low, you could sell an engine. You can, that's legit. But, when they're kind of like, are you sure? Are you sure? It's like, I'm sure. And they're like, what's wrong? And I'm like, well, truthfully, I don't know. I know that you have low compression. It could be a piston, huh? Could it be an intake valve, an exhaust valve, a head gasket, a cracked head, warped head, block? Could it be a worn cylinder? Yes. So when I say, hey, I'm going to do more diagnosis, this is what I'm about to tell you. This one's going to be big brain though. This system deactivates the cylinders by essentially letting the lifter go limp, and then your cam tries to pump your valve, but your valve doesn't move, right? So when I compression tested, it has no compression. If I think it's a leaking valve, a leaking rings, a hole in the piston, a leaking head gasket, I do the cylinder leakage test, right? Boom, I do the cylinder leakage test. Get this. No leakage, like 10% leakage. That's a pass. How can it have 0 compression but not have a leak? So what if this system won't turn off and it will never open the valve? It won't suck air in, right? It's not breathing, but it's not leaking. So when I did that, I said, hey, you've got low compression, but you got a passing cylinder leakage. It's not worn. They were saying, is it pistons? Is it rings? Anillos? I'm like, no. All that's sealed, but your valves aren't opening. I can't exactly tell which one, but your valves aren't opening. So either A, your camshaft is worn flat. The lobes are gone. Make sense? The lobe makes the valve open. What if your camshaft is worn flat? It's a circle. It's not going to open the valves. Or your displacement on demand like this is stuck on, and that activates this lifter right here. And this lifter is stuck down. It's limp. It's not going to activate it. So what's really the fix? If it's the lifter, I could put a new lifter in it. But let me tell you something. The main reason these lifters fail is because they're not getting adequate oil pressure to be pumped back up. And the oil comes through this VLOM, which is like this plate up here. And where does the oil come from before that? The oil pan, through the pump, through the galley, through all that. So it's like, so you got to understand my perspective on this is I could probably say it's most likely a lifter. I could chuck a lifter in there, but then if it fails again, because that's not going to be cheap. To do a lifter on that 5.3, you got to pull the head. So if I'm going to be billing them a couple $1,000s and it fails in another 6 months, I don't want that phone call. So I either A, tell them, get a new engine. You looked at used engines lately? They're not cheap. And guess what the used engines got? The same crap system. So I say, what I would do, it's the last one I did the same thing. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a displacement on demand failure. I'm going to eliminate the whole displacement on demand. I'm going to get rid of that. We're going to put in regular lifters. We're going to recalibrate the ECU to think DOD is gone. And do you think I broke the law? Why not? I modified emissions. Wait a minute. It's actually approved. There's what's called an executive order number. You can eliminate the displacement on demand and do an EO approved tune. If you do it just right, it's legit. My price on that for them is gonna be like $4,500. So to me, would I fix it? Nah, I'd buy a new Tahoe. I buy a different one. But for them, they're like, hey, we want to take it to Mexico or whatever. And I'm like, whatever, you're gonna put $4,500 into a 2009 Tahoe if you want. But I'd say that'd be a better decision than throw $2,000 into a lifter that's probably gonna fail over and over and over. And once they get to Mexico, they're saying they can't get people to work on it. So I'm like, yeah, I'll hook it up if you want. So I tore it all down. I'm actually going to share a video with you. I tore it all down. You remember this lifter right here? What happened was it went limp. It collapsed closed. When it collapsed closed, it was kind of banging around in there and it broke the little guide and it turned sideways. And it's supposed to have a roller right here that rolls over the cam. And instead of rolling over the cam, it just got drug across the cam. It wore the cam out. It wore the lifter out. There's a bunch of metal in there. So like that engine really, if I were to throw a lifter in there, I wouldn't have fixed it for long, if at all. Makes sense. The cam's all shot. That thing's, it needs a total rebuild, which is what I told him it was going to need anyway. So that was like a sniper shot right there. That was like a, how are you telling us what it needs that you didn't even take it apart? And I'm like, well, I took some measurements and I understand the system pretty well. That's going to need a rebuild. And they're like, well, let us know. I'm like, no, I already did. I don't have to take it apart. I'm just letting you know. It's a rebuild or I won't get involved. I'm not going to try to throw stuff at it and goof off. And so I got that one all apart right now. I just ordered parts. I'll send you a video. It'll be cool. So if you look at this, the active fuel management's like right here. It comes from the pan, through the sump, through the oil pump, through all this. If this system's failing up here, good chance you got issues down here, which is why I'm saying a full rebuild too. And here's what you can see. Pumps it up, goes to this solenoid. If this solenoid is on or off, we'll control if the lifter's pumped up or limp. Make sense? That's how the system works. All right, now if you understood that, you're going to see why this system's better, okay? I got GM stuff. I like GM stuff. Toyota doesn't do displacement on demand. You know what they do? Atkinson cycle. So you're like, Atkinson, what? This is modern engine subject, right? This is what the Atkinson cycle is going to do. These are the words. The combustion chamber slightly smaller, effective expansion stroke to the length. Let me explain to you. Look right here. If you do a TDC to BDC, that's going to give you a certain amount of displacement, right? That's your stroke. Then you have to do the volume calculation of the cylinder. Great. Let's say this is 2 liters. That would be a 2-liter engine, but that's not per cylinder. That'd be all 4, right? So let's say it's a 2-liter. All right. What if, using my variable valve timing, I open the intake valve, I let this piston come down, and then I let it go back up to the halfway point with the intake valve open. Where'd all that air go? Right back out. Then at 50% at halfway, I close the intake valve. So now it's only going to go from the halfway point up. Is it a 2-liter anymore? It's more like a 1-liter. But I didn't shut cylinders down. Make sense? I hung the valve open longer. Well, how the heck do you do that? VVT. Fast, very rapid functioning VVT. Hang the valve open a little bit longer, close it. Now here's the negative. Do you think I just changed my compression if I'm not going all the way BDC to TDC? Yeah, so they have crappy low compression. So a lot of times if it's going to be an Atkinson's, we like to do a turbo. And if it's got a turbo or a supercharger, that's going to be more like a Miller. That's the difference. But technically on an Atkinson, they'll run high compression pistons, but they won't use all of it. And the reason that we could do this, we can actually still get just enough compression right here. And we'll do gasoline direct injection into the cylinder and we'll still get it to fire. Do you think this makes a lot of power? So people don't like Atkinson because it doesn't make a lot of power. However, you want to know the positive? If you need the power, it won't do the Atkinson stroke. It'll give you the full 2-liter stroke. So they'll get good horsepower, but then like on the freeway, it'll turn into Atkinson. You won't even really feel it on the freeway. But if it for some reason got stuck in Atkinson mode, it'd be like a golf cart. It'd be junk. But you know, it's just too. You're gonna do a 1 liter on a Camry? Come on, that's not enough. The Camry's run. Oh well, don't tell me about the golf cart. The Prius is Atkinson. Right. So this is the thing. If you look at a brand new Camry, they're getting like 40 something miles per gallon. That's crazy for a non-hybrid. That's nuts. Atkinson. So this is a variation of displacement on demand. It's just not shutting cylinders down. It's using VVT. Okay. How we got to diagnose this kind of similar. It's just diagnosing VVT. But your compression readings are going to be low. You guys remember when we took vacuum readings? If it's an Atkinson cycle, your vacuum readings are all jacked up. Now you know why. They start to play around with the variable valve timing and reduce the displacement. Okay, cool. Okay, you guys made it. Go get yourself a nice lunch if you want. If not, I'm going to head over to the shop. We got a few things to do. That's your call. Big subject. You guys did good.